I'd like to have a motion to reconvene in open session.
So moved.
Oops. Second.
Okay, all in favor? Peter,
Aye.
Susan Fox,
Aye.
Susan Manning,
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Lorraine.
Aye.
Who did I miss? Did I miss somebody? In my...
Eric.
Eric. Jeez. Eric. Still on mute.
All right, you have enough votes.
Okay, Andrew. All right. All right, motion carries. Public appearances. First will be Jennifer Habowitz.
All right. Dear Dr. Olson, Monona Grove administrators, and Monona Grove School Board. I'm speaking to you again today as a concerned parent of a freshman and seventh grader in your district and a parent representative of a group of parents who share many of the same concerns as I do. I spoke to Dr. Olson again last Friday for an hour about many of the following concerns, but I would like to reiterate them to all of you to assure that we're all on the same page, that we open the lines of communication, continue to hold all of you accountable to your district students, our children, our families, and to each other. We continue to get varying communication from each of you, blaming each other, our teachers, our health department for various decisions being made in regards to the return to in-person learning for our children. The lack of honesty, transparency, and sense of urgency has become increasingly evident, which is infuriating. First and foremost, in regards to lack of transparency, I am angry at the fact that I still don't have the data in my hands or available to the public that I, along with several other district families, requested nearly a month ago. Mr. McGrath noted during a high school parent forum on January 19th that he was surprised at how many students were receiving failing grades in our high school. He was concerned enough to offer 2 bridge days of credit recovery for these students, something our high school has never had to do before. Interestingly, I originally asked Mr. McGrath for these numbers before that on January 14th, and I didn't receive a reply. I sent another communication to him on the 20th, along with each of you. I heard back from one school board member who questioned why I thought this information was such a necessity. I then heard back from our superintendent weeks later, who told me that such data wasn't even available. Other district families inquiring about the same data got varying responses, stating it wasn't available in the format they wanted, or that it was available but at a cost. Why is this information not readily accessible to our district families? As a parent or a grandparent yourselves, wouldn't you want to know how our district is performing? According to the lawyer who we've been talking to, 14 days is the average time in which a simple open record request should be fulfilled. It's been a month. What are we afraid of? Dr. Olson told me on Friday that Mr. McGrath runs a weekly report for each student, which shows how many are receiving failing grades. He stated he is unable to share that report due to a student name being attached to that report. I get that. I told him I don't need a fancy report. I do not need a fancy spreadsheet. I don't need old data to compare and contrast. I just want Mr. McGrath to tally the number of failing grades in order to show each and every one of you that virtual learning 2.0 is absolutely failing many of our middle and high schoolers, some who are in jeopardy of now not having enough credits to even graduate this year. And that is something that needs to be addressed now, not in March, not in April. Dr. Olson and Mr. McGrath simply said those numbers would be presented to you tonight and that I needed to wait for this. I wanted these numbers ahead of time to show you that there needs to be a sense of urgency to get these kids back in the door sooner than 3 months after our health department lifted their restrictions. I want the numbers to show you all that the planning needs to be underway right now to assure that these students are back in school full days, 5 days a week for in-person instruction in the fall. I want these numbers to show you that these students need more than 6 hours of in-person education and days of disruption. I want these numbers now so that our elected officials can be a voice for our district families, to our superintendent, to our teachers, to our local health department, to show you that virtual learning and these disastrous hybrid models are destroying our children. Again, the research is compiling quickly to show that our poor students are not the spread of this disease. Our schools are not the source of community transmission. Virtual learning environment is affecting our children's social, emotional, and academic health so incredibly much that some of this is now irreversible. Which one of our school board members has stood up to be a voice of reason to our teachers, to our superintendent, or to our local health department to be a voice for our kids? I have reached out to Janelle Heinrich at Public Health Madison Dane County and our county executive Joe Parisi and our governor often, weekly, to be an advocate for our kids. Which one of you have done the same? If the objective data and statistics of failing grades and deteriorating academics isn't enough to motivate you to do this in our district, maybe you could have a couple of our amazing school counselors speak at these school board meetings to discuss what they are seeing with our own children. For example, I had the pleasure of speaking with a 7th grade counselor, Mr. Fred Bartman, this week when seeking help and guidance from my unmotivated and regressing 7th grader, who states that my son is definitely not alone in his struggles. He was amazing. Why aren't we relying on our own professionals to be a voice of reason and create some sense of urgency to us, to you, to our public, to our teachers, to our health department, in our decision making and planning to offer more in-person education in more appropriate and effective manner as soon as we possibly can? As stated multiple times before, when I repeatedly reached out for our school district safety and policies and procedures for months in the fall, our own superintendent reassured me that these policies and procedures were in place and every teacher would be ready and willing to enter our school doors once those Public Health Madison Dane County removed their metrics. This was done December 15th. Yet our district's not willing to get our struggling middle and high school students back into any sort of in-person education for middle schools and high school until 3 months later. Dr. Olson states these teachers' reluctancy to enter the school doors played a huge part in this, to which I question what was done to put their mind at ease. What kind of education or ultimatums were given? Interestingly, some of the school board members now say that the teachers had nothing to do with them, that this had nothing to do with the teachers, but rather the date suggested by our superintendent. Dr. Olson told me that he was sick and tired of having his leadership questioned. My response to him was that the actions speak louder than words. Why are we one of the last 3 districts of 16 in Dane County to offer any sort of in-person education for our students? Why was our superintendent so willing to sign off on an amicus brief, giving our health department all decision-making power over the school districts in Dane County without a school board vote, taking away our individual district decision?
That's time.
I thought I got a warning. I thought I got a warning.
I gave you a minute, then I gave you 20 seconds.
Oh, I did not hear my minute. Can I please finish up my last paragraph? I think
I will allow the last paragraph.
Okay. Have we tried to be a leader in our county, looking at the multiple private elementary schools and charter schools in Dane County to figure out how we can offer full day, 4 to 5 day per week in-person education to our students? These private schools have to follow the same health department rules we do. Have we brainstormed how we can utilize our extra spaces in cafeterias, gyms, encore classes, etc., to get our students back in the doors like the private schools are doing right next door? Actions speak louder than words. Lastly, I am still waiting for my public record request I made 2 weeks ago in regards to my communication between our school board president, other school board members, and the superintendent. I became aware that the school board president informed other school board members that they're no longer able to communicate with me. This is unacceptable. As an elected official, it's your job to listen and respond to the constituents about your concerns, even when the questions are hard and the work seems tedious and plentiful. I'm not asking for anything more than this data to be made public so that each one of you can put the social, emotional, and academic health of our poor students on the forefront to assure these decisions are being made based on facts and data. I am begging you all, put our struggling students first. Please be a voice of reason for them. Please help them succeed, and please do not let them become another failing statistic. Sincerely, Jennifer Habowitz.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next is Stacy or Jason. Is this Sari?
Yes.
All right.
So for the last 5 months, it's been extremely difficult to keep our children motivated. It's a daily struggle following up with assignments and other tasks. And we've moved our daughter to Deerfield. She started this week. She's going to be attending 4 days, full days. And that brings me to the question, why are we only doing 2 days when the students come back on March 15th? 2 days a week for 3.5 hours is not enough time. Why can the district right next door, just 6 or 7 miles down the road, go 4 full days and we're not even half that? We need more. The other question I have is most of the state has been open for the last several months. Monona Grove doesn't make the top 20 for student population size. Why can everybody else be open and not be having the issues, but we continuously delay? I would urge you to open at least 4 days a week for more than 3.5 hours, or even 4 days a week for 3.5 hours, or 2 days a week, full days. We need more time. Our children need to be motivated. And my last question is, if the CDC has been recommending that schools can be open for the past several weeks, why do we have to wait until March 15th? That's all I have.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, moving to the consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing no hands raised. All in favor, Lorraine,
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Susan Fox,
Aye.
Susan Manning,
Aye.
Andrew, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. Next is recognitions.
Okay, so our first recognition is one of the items that you just voted on in the consent agenda, and that was the resignation of our high school activities and athletic director, Jeff Schreiner. And I'd like to take a moment to recognize Jeff and thank him, for his years of service, 22 years in the Monona Grove School District, and can't just speak highly enough of, just like everyone else going through this year as his last year. But it's not a surprise to me. I mean, you know what the job is like, and the number of hours, Jeff, in that gym or in the fields and so on, just incredible over the years. So again, thank you so much for your commitment and work in the Monona Grove School District.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Hey, Dan, if I could take just a moment, I'm not resigning, I'm retiring. But
did I say resign? I'm sorry. Okay, thank you for that.
But what I would like to just take a moment to say is, my exit ramp, I'm a happy person, and my exit ramp has taken me to a whole new comfort zone. But my wife and I are very happy that this time has come for me. I'm very fortunate that I was able to spend 22 years in a school district like Monona Grove High School. When I signed up to take the job, I didn't realize it was going to be that long of a road, but it was a great road to travel. I compliment the people I lead, the coaches. I look at my experiences. I can walk in our main gym and I can look at the wall and I can look at the experience that our coaches gave me an opportunity to be a part of and stuff. But to live in our community as well, it's been a great job. I look back at it, and it's a great decision that I made, and I want to thank our school board for the support through the years and stuff. And sure, retirement's going to be fun, but I'm just glad that I had enough passion to want to do that and found a job that I was passionate about. So I want to say thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay. So we do have some additional recognitions this evening. First of all, our student recognitions. Each year, the Urban League of Greater Madison celebrates the achievements of outstanding young men and women across Dane County in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We're proud of our students from GDS and Monona Grove High School who received the award this year. And I know that I'm going to mispronounce a couple names, but I want to make sure that these students are recognized for their excellent work. So I'm going to give it my best shot here. And I think it's important that I read everyone's name. So from GDS, we have Mila Adams, D'Angelo Clay, Osman Najee, Emma Hayward, Cadence Jackson, and Jacob Vang. And from Monona Grove High School, Dora Derer, Artasia Howard, Hannah Iobed, Cameron Johnson, Laya Moore, Shane Peters, Thaniel Adams, and Anisha Perkins. So again, congratulations to all those students. We also have Monona Grove High School students Lacey Martinson and Haley Larson are running a campaign for Students of the Year by fundraising to find a cure for blood cancer. Students of the Year is a national development program for high school students. Participants are tasked with using professional career skills such as marketing and entrepreneurship to raise money for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And then there's more available information on your link. Monona Grove swim team members qualified for all 11 events in the boys state swim and dive meet last week. Congratulations to the team and coaches. And again, you have a list of all the student athletes who qualified along with their events. And lastly, congratulations to our wrestling team and coaches on a successful season. Monona Grove High School senior Christian Schlicht has qualified for the state wrestling meet this Saturday. Christian is the first MG wrestler to qualify for the state meet since the early 1980s when Eric Jensen was a back-to-back state champ. So congratulations, Christian.
And when music was good. Sorry, I had to add that in.
Those are my recognitions this evening.
Thanks, Dan. Correspondence.
And there is a letter for the board listed that you can read from the MGA.
All right, thank you. Administrative reports, superintendent's report.
Okay, we have our admin team with us tonight to give an update, answer any questions on the reopening planning. As well, we have some data that we'd like to share with you from the first semester. And so I think we'd like to go right to the presentation first, and then we can follow up with any questions that the board members have. Again, as usual, when we give the presentation, I would ask that board members hold their questions until the end of the presentation to make sure we have an opportunity to go through the entire report. So with that, if it's okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen. We do have some slides. These documents were then recently uploaded to Board Docs as well, so you have them available. And just okay, and presenting our data this evening, we're going to kick it off with our Director of Instruction, Lisa Hype, and then our Director of Student Services, Krista Foster, will share the second part of the presentation. And this, these bullet points are some of the data and information that we'll be sharing this evening. And from here, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Right. Thank you very much, Dan. So I wanted to just say before we start looking closely at some of the first semester data points that we can share, you all know that this has been a very challenging semester, and certainly our teachers and our students and families have really done their best to navigate these really difficult and challenging times. Nothing about this is easy, and I think that when you look at the data that we're going to talk about and share, you all realize the context in which it is coming. So Virtual Learning 2.0 was our instructional model since the start of the school year, and it wasn't until after first semester concluded that we started bringing back some students in a hybrid form. So the information shared with you here is all related to the Virtual Learning 2.0 instructional model. The slide you have before you here is just a district demographic slide to just remind you for some context who our students are in terms of student population in the district. And so Dan, next slide. Wanted to share with you some information just about how the choices were made for hybrid and virtual and the corresponding demographics for that. So this is data pertaining to the 4K through 5 elementary students. And you'll see that we had about overall 42% of students were selecting hybrid, and 58% of students were selecting virtual. When you look at the demographics specifically for hybrid and for virtual, you'll see that they're very proportional in terms of representation. And then, of course, when you look at the demographics as compared to the overall elementary population, because more students did select virtual, you will see maybe some slightly higher numbers in categories such as students with IEPs, students experiencing low socioeconomic status, and students of color and white students also at a slightly higher percentage selecting virtual. But again, we did have 58% of our elementary students overall go with virtual as the instructional model. Dan, next slide. So during the first semester, were students attending? And you can see in comparison to the previous 4 years, yes, our students were attending. But it is also important to note that traditionally when we mark attendance, it's based on students being physically present in our brick and mortar buildings. Obviously in virtual learning, that's not the option. So when we marked attendance for virtual learning, we had options for students to be present if they were attending synchronously, whether that be a synchronous part of a class or a synchronous session for a small group. But teachers, if they saw the student during the day synchronously, that was one way to be marked present. Also, we had an option for students who were choosing to engage more asynchronously, and they could be marked present by submitting daily work that was assigned, and then that was a second way that students could be marked present. And then Dan, next slide, please. And you'll see that high level of attendance for year to date is carried throughout all of our schools in the district. Okay, thank you, Dan. So academically, every year we use some sort of universal screener to help us understand how our students are doing. Previous to the last 2 years, MAP, Measures of Academic Progress, was our universal screener. But 2 years ago, we switched to iReady as our diagnostic test in the district. And we are using this as our universal screener in grades kindergarten through 8. Again, this year being slightly different, we have data for grades 2 through 8. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that data is slightly different for this year. So iReady is a computer adaptive screener. And so as students are answering questions correctly, it adjusts the next question students are seeing. And what you'll notice here again is that there's a comparison with last year and then this year. Last year, when we gave the first fall diagnostic to our students, it was in early October. And this year, when we gave the diagnostic for our students, it was in November. So it was a slightly later time frame for the administration of the diagnostic. There were a couple of things that factored into that. Again, students were adjusting to virtual learning. Normally, we give the iReady diagnostic in school, in class, and teachers are with students proctoring that live during the school day. But because we didn't have students actually in person in school, the diagnostic was done remotely. So some of our teachers were still navigating how to proctor in a virtual setting. So they would hold small groups or even sometimes whole class doing some diagnostic administration with our students. But students did engage in the iReady fall diagnostic in November remotely this year. Dan, next slide. So the high school principal, Mitch McGrath, was able to share some data about just the overall number breakdown recently. And this is a comparison with 2019-20 and then this year from first semester and the grade data. So you'll see how many total grades were given for all students in all classes, and then again, how they are dispersed through the grades A through F, and including P for passing. In many of the areas, you'll see it's very similar. However, you will, of course, note that we do have a higher percentage of students receiving F grades this year than last. And there has been, of course, concern about how our students will receive some opportunity for intervention due to failing grades. The high school responded prior to the end of the semester, offering some more in-person work for some students. All teachers were engaged in reassessment opportunities for students. And also, as was previously mentioned by one of the speakers during public comment, there were some bridge days at the end of second semester, but before the, at the end of first semester, but before second semester began. So that was another opportunity for students to address some failing grades. The high school team is committed to continue to talking about the credit recovery options that can be possible still throughout the second semester. And Dan, next slide. You'll see at Glacial Drumlin, this chart is for students in grades 6 through 8, and it is focusing just on the knowledge and skill grades in the core area classes. And in part, this is because this was data that was able to be pulled in a clear way. As you know, Glacial Drumlin has some interesting quirks to their schedules. I see Chris smiling a little bit. So we wanted to just be as straightforward to give you a sample of some of these data points for comparison. So first semester this year at Glacial Drumlin, with over 6,000 grades entered, you will see the distribution here. And again, slightly higher in the F area with students who were not able to engage and really achieve in a manner that would take them into a passing percentage. So this pattern is concerning to everyone, and we want to make sure our students are able to have the academic success that they so vitally need and deserve. So you might be asking, like, what has contributed to more Fs? How do we address that? And in part, one of the main contributors, of course, is the stress and the upheaval to our normal ways of life that we're experiencing in living through a pandemic. But I think the next few slides will also shed some light, asking about participation and engagement in classes. Dan, next slide. We were able to have over 200 teachers give us some responses. So again, this is more of a sample, but I think you'll see the trends will bear out. In asking teachers about the level of participation, and we define participation just as students regularly completing tasks or turning in assignments, you can see that in many ways, students are leaning more towards the positive end of this, where they are turning in assignments and they are completing tasks. With, in fact, like 51% of students are in that like 5 and 6 numeric range on this Likert scale. So that's a good sign. But however, we do have like 46%, a little over that, 46.6% of students who are falling more in the middle there. So we know that if students aren't turning in work, if they're not completing tasks, then we're not able to give them feedback. We're not able to really redirect their learning in the positive ways that so often happens, when students are in school. And those are things that our teachers are continually using new tools and new strategies to work on to reach students in ways that they'll be encouraged and motivated to continue to turn in assignments and complete tasks. Dan, the next slide. So this slide asked about engagement. And again, we defined engagement as students who were sharing their opinions, their ideas, asking questions, interacting with the teacher, interacting with classmates. And you'll see here, again, a really wider range of responses through the Likert scale, with about 32% of teachers saying that their students were engaging and interacting regularly and readily in the 5 and 6 range. But really, most of our students are falling in that middle range again, the 3 or the 4, like almost 53% of students are there. And I think this shares this sheds light on a few things. You know, again, this is very difficult for everyone, and this is hard for students to sustain that level of motivation to continue to do well. And teachers are using new tools, new tricks, new ways of offering choice, new ways of getting students to share their thoughts and ideas. Lots of Jamboards are being used. The chat feature is used regularly. We're part of Google Enterprise and using breakout rooms. But really, everybody is working diligently and trying to find ways to create an atmosphere where students are able to do their best learning in a very challenging environment. Dan, next slide. So I did want to share just a few of the teachers' comments from the survey that they took. And I think, again, a few things I'll want to point out here. There really is a conversation to be had about the cameras on, cameras off part of the virtual learning. And there are pros and cons on both sides of that, to be honest. Students often feel very self-conscious with cameras on. Some students are, fearful of letting their peers or their teacher really into their home virtually with the camera on. And so some students just feel safer and feel like they can still participate even with the camera off. But as you can imagine, this is really hard for a teacher who is trying to get the pulse of the room, see the students' reactions, understand how to respond to students or how students are responding to them. And when cameras are off, that makes it extremely difficult to have that kind of positive interaction. So as you read these statements, I just want to reiterate that, our teachers are really doing some phenomenal work to try to find what will work for students. And the same thing doesn't work with all students. So they really are monitoring their class, following up, and trying to connect with students. The desire is there. And sometimes this is really hard when you're feeling like it's just not working for all of your kids. But it doesn't mean that anyone stops being committed to trying to find the way to make this work. And then as we transition into, Krista is going to speak on some mental health and wellness pieces. I guess I just want to sort of wrap up this part by saying that the emotional toll is real. The emotional toll that teachers are feeling, that students are feeling, and families are feeling, it's getting harder the longer that the pandemic is impacting our lives. And so I think it's very important to couple some of the academic presentation pieces here with Krista's piece that will focus on the mental health and wellness aspects of our current situation. Krista?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so, as much as we prefer to have quantitative data, I try to do my best here to reflect some of that and give you a little bit of comparison. This year is clearly an outlier. What's different? What are we experiencing other than we all have a context because we're experiencing this in our own lives, right? As Lisa just sort of said, we know this year is taking a toll, but what does it really what does it really look like, and how has it shaped the role of some of our mental health professionals in the schools? So what I have for you here are some reflection pieces, and I shared similar information, maybe not in the exact same way, but very similar themes 2 months ago in December. So in preparing for this meeting tonight, I thought it would be interesting for you to see the answers to these questions and see if anything has really changed over the course of time, and to try to give you the best summary we can, and hit some of the highlights. We've talked a lot about mental health and social emotional well-being throughout the pandemic, and it's been a hot topic again since we last met and discussed. So from our local context, here is some feedback from our entire, 4K-12 student services team. And I tried to capture as many themes as I could. Obviously, these are individuals responding as well. So this doesn't necessarily reflect the experience of every single individual, but it does capture the themes across the board. So I did ask the team, to reflect on, and again, this is a repeat, what percentage of your time is spent planning for or responding to the individual mental health needs of students, staff, or families? And if they could, to compare that to the percentage of time in previous years. So, you can see what I have here at the elementary level. And obviously this is folks in different roles. We have very young students where there's not as much individual work with some of our 4 and 5 year olds. So there's a lot of class-wide support. And, so some of the percentages will vary based on what the role of the individual is. But percentages range from 10 to 50% of time working on those individual mental health or social emotional related needs, very similar to, or in some cases even less time than in prior years. Middle school team estimated that this is about 50 to 60% of their time, which is not that different in their estimation than previous years. Some themes there, again, I think at both levels, elementary and middle school, and certainly true for the high school when we get there. Just that inability to have those walk-in connections or those hallway connections or those chances to speak with students and deal with issues as they arise has certainly been noticed from the team. And they're recognizing that maybe not all of the potential opportunities for individual problem solving are making their way to them. High school, again, within the various roles, about 40 to 85% of their time is being spent on responding to the individual needs of students, staff, and families, primarily students. And that this was the team that it varies. So the team felt very strongly. Some were noticing a very drastic increase, and some, for the reason I just named of not having that walk-in contact, were feeling like they're spending less time on those individual needs and certainly seeing fewer students overall. Some different reflections, just, I think I said this the last time as well, but just the amount of time that maybe an individual case, we'll call it, or an individual situation requires is very different. So sometimes it's fewer students, but by the time you make the connection, get to the root of the issue, set up the, various ways of contact and having multiple meetings, they're spending more time on some of these situations. Whereas within the scope of a school day, when you're seeing someone face to face, it doesn't necessarily require the same lift in terms of engagement and getting to the root of the issue. Similarly, the parallel question is, in your estimation, how much time has been spent this year proactively planning for or responding to more of the universal mental health needs of students, staff, or families, and how does that compare to prior years? This across the board at the elementary, this is a very consistent theme. They've done some really strong work with supporting universal SEL, and it's been a bit of a silver lining to this pandemic. It's been a huge undertaking, lots of work, lots of time and co-planning and working with teachers, but they're seeing some payoff from those efforts as well. So across the board, the elementary team, maybe with one exception, noted a pretty drastic increase in their time spent on universal mental health and social emotional learning. And again, this is a team that spends quite a bit of their time in that arena in a typical year. So that was something we noticed. The middle school is reflecting that they spend less time particularly in grades 6 through 8. The 5th grade is different, I think, along with the elementary. That was in every school at every grade level, for K-5. That was definitely, they're working as a team and doing some things differently and spending some more time at that universal level. 6-8 reflected that it looks a little different for them this year in the virtual setting to date. And for the high school, their reflection was similar to or less time versus prior years, about 15 to 50% of their time sort of in that realm of universal supports. You can go ahead to the next slide, Dan. And so to drill down a little bit, we asked the team, have you noticed differences? So we kind of had this idea in quantification. So some things are similar, some are a little less, some are a little more. What does that really mean? How has the pandemic impacted the type, frequency, or amount of work that you have been doing? Let's see, you want to go back one slide, a second there. And that is, they have noticed an increase in requests for student support related to, understandably, anxiety, depression, lack of motivation, coping with the uncertainty of the pandemic, grief, loss. The things you would expect are definitely being noticed as trends. One across the board sort of universal reflection was that the student services team have spent more of their time responding to requests or engaging in social emotional support and work with staff members. Similarly to the pieces I just described for student support, staff members have either sought out the student services staff or worked with them in consultation to work through some social emotional support needs. A lot of more requests for support are coming from parents and caregivers versus the typical teacher or student referrals. That's just, I think, understandably, parents and caregivers are much more engaged in their students' day-to-day learning, and they're not hesitating to reach out, which is positive, but it is drastically different than the amount of referrals that come directly from parents and caregivers at all levels. I mean, as you can anticipate, some of those requests come, at the elementary level more frequently, but at all levels, noticed an increase in that this year. More requests. This is a theme across the board at every level. More requests for support from the student services team are being initiated due to either academic difficulty, the difficulties in engagement and motivation in those few cases that, Lisa sort of spoke about. And often that what's happening is that these lead to the identification of some sort of underlying social, emotional, or mental health need. It's just a different pathway to get there. The team sort of noticed it takes taking them a little bit more time to unpack and get to those root causes and then coming up with a plan to problem solve. So again, links to that idea of maybe fewer individual students that you're maybe seeing throughout a week or problem solving with, is spending significant amount of time trying to partner with team members and figure out what these barriers are and what can be done. And then all staff in various roles, not limited to school social workers, are all reporting spending more time supporting families and students with barriers to access this year. Basic needs, technology pieces, just anything that is getting in the way of access to learning. That is a bit different than previous years as well. And then the last slide that you have here in front of you, we also wanted to talk a little bit about, so what's important to take away from this year when we get back to whatever normal looks like in the future. There are some pieces from this team and from others that we've just wanted to capture. And several team members, even through asking these questions, the way that they were asked, found a way to point out that students continue to demonstrate their resilience. Some of the direct quotes are, students are doing amazing, they're handling everything, students are doing great, and a reminder that they have gained valuable skills this year, whether they're academic or, I think one of the team members called them soft skills, worked on through advisory, some invaluable life lessons. And so, again, I think just that mindset or the way we talk about the impact of this year is really important. And just as we need to talk about maybe what we spend more time on in the future, we don't want to lose sight of what has been accomplished. A theme, understandably so, from this team is that, yes, the pandemic has illuminated some needs in the area of mental health and social emotional wellness. This is work that existed before the pandemic. It's work that will continue to be necessary after the pandemic. And the hope is that the focus stays where it needs to be on the social, emotional, and mental health needs of students well beyond the pandemic. One specific thing I don't have on here too is I think just with the adjustments this year and the use of PD time being necessarily dedicated to learning new tools, teaching virtual learning, adjusting schedules, it was a reflection that losing the time with staff to continue like our large scale trauma modules, for example, and some of the youth mental health first aid, some of the broader PD opportunities we're usually able to work in, that has been missed. Those opportunities have been missed, and the team is looking forward to being able to continue that work in the future. Another really positive thing that the team would like to make sure to carry forward is that a variety of student services team members and administrative team members as well have been able to dedicate more time for home visits and meeting with families on their terms. This virtual meeting world that we've been living in has really leveled the playing field in some ways, and it has eliminated that need to have parents and families and students in this case always sort of meet us on our turf and have these conversations. And it really has been enlightening to see the willingness of families to connect and engage and have some of these virtual connections as well. It's a good reminder this year that families and staff members need support too. And that the caregivers, whether the caregivers are parents and family members, whether the caregivers are staff members, or even when the caregivers are mental health professionals in the school, we need to be conscious about the need to care for those caregivers in authentic ways and recognize that this has had an impact on everyone. Virtual learning has allowed some of our students to really flourish. This is a theme that comes up every single time. So no one is discounting, as Lisa said, how challenging this has been. And that virtual learning is, has been a struggle for some in some areas. We also have some students who, for the first time, without the triggers and barriers and, negative associations with some of their school experiences, have really been able to engage in positive ways and thinking about proactively capitalizing on that is something that we should continue to do. The elementary level, particularly, I touched on this earlier, the work that they've done toward embedding those social emotional learning standards in new and meaningful ways through morning meetings, through planning mini lessons for teachers, co-planning with teams. That work has been so appreciated by teachers and staff, and it's been work that they've really been able to dedicate some time to, and there's a strong desire within that group to continue this work with teachers and families at the universal level versus just automatically returning to our status quo of kind of our model for teaching developmental guidance lessons or classroom counseling in isolation. And at the secondary level, similarly, the utility and usefulness and opportunity for relationships that the advisory period has offered has not gone unnoticed, and students have really appreciated it. Multiple staff members reflected on just how positive that's been as a way of connection, relationship, and a support for students. So those are some of the things that, as challenging as this has been, that were recognized as things to pay attention to and to carry forward as we move into the future. Thanks.
I apologize. I know I was off a slide there for a while. So.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's okay.
But okay, so board members, besides any questions that you might have, for information that Lisa and Krista presented, we have our principals with us this evening as well that can answer any questions related to this.
You're on mute, Andrew.
I'm sorry, I'm just looking around. Peter?
I use electronics. 2 points. First of all, thank you for the comprehensive report. Thanks for the things that you've thought about here. I would like to ask for one thing, which is I'd like to ask for two things. One is if you could forward to us sort of the comprehensive teacher comments rather than just the selected few, because that really helps me understand. I don't get a good insight into what's going on in the schools and what people are seeing. And it would really help us And I know everything's not going smoothly and perfect, and there's some pluses and minuses, and it would really help me as a board member to see inside if I could just get all of those comments. I thought the ones that you presented, I think that's very interesting and it's very informative, and I'd like to continue on that, and if possible, to get all of the comments. The second thing is I'd like to see another report like this this summer, with the emphasis on what you just mentioned, Krista, which is things that we're looking, that we're learning. And what I want to know is what it is that we believe deliberately and with thoughtfulness that we can take, that we learn from this whole experience, that we can take going forward. I think that because of the disruption, there's always an opportunity to learn and to do things better when we go forward. And hopefully in the fall, we're back, assuming we're back to where we should be, back to normal. I would like to know that we have thought deliberately about the things that we can take forward in this, learn from this. And so I'd like to see this summer discussion of that and what you guys can think of and what the thought is, the things that we can take forward. But other than that, I don't have any questions because I thought it was very thorough and a very informative report. Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Thank you, Andrew. Hold on, I'm gonna lower my hand. Thank you very much for this. I have a number of questions, so I will just roll through them. Okay, so, and I'm trying to do it in slide order because that's how I took my notes. So starting with demographics, I'm curious to know whether or not there was a change in free and reduced or student with disability percentages compared to last year.
Elizabeth, do you mean overall demographics in the district?
Yeah, like literally slide 1.
I think it's pretty close. I mean,
Okay.
It might be a slight change, but we're really pretty consistent.
Okay.
We're usually always we're very low overall in students identified with IEPs, and in many districts you'll see that closer to 10, 12, 15%, and we're usually below that. And then with our students with low socioeconomic status, realities, free and reduced numbers, we're very consistent on that.
Great, thank you, Lisa. While I have you, Lisa, in regards to the iReady information that was presented, I know that because you had presented this and just from my own experiences, right, that there were certain grade levels that didn't receive it. Makes total sense to me why we didn't do that. Just for the purposes of comparison, when you gave us the 1920 data, did that include the grade levels who are not included in 2021, or is it a direct comparison? So, 2 or 3 through 8, and then 2 or 3 through, I can't remember when we started the iReady, but
yeah,
you get my question right.
Sure, yes. You're right. We did not include the K and 1 because of the at-home implementation of it, and just the students are so little, and it's just such a difficult thing to navigate. So we opted not to do that in the fall. Although I will say in the spring, because we do need to have an early literacy screener, and we use iReady for that, we will be using K1 and 2 students again in the spring with that. In terms of the direct comparison, the 1920 results do include K through 8.
Okay.
And so the this year's results are the 2 through 8.
Okay.
And again, one might argue kindergarten and 1 are really emergent in a lot of those skill areas, but
no criticism, just curious so I know like what the data represents. And then in regards to the grade level or the grades specifically for a secondary, I appreciate the cumulative amount of Fs. Do we know how many unique students that represents?
I can actually, Mitch, you can probably speak to that more. I was going to say, I know it looks like it's 200 and some Fs, but I believe it was around maybe 100 students, but I'm not sure exactly what the final number was.
I think that was a 106. I can double check here while we sit, but that's my recollection.
Thanks, Chris. Or Mitch, what about you, Chris, at the middle school? Do you know how many unique students that represents?
Well, I'll speak to that. We pulled that data for Chris.
Okay.
And so again, it is not, I think that was like 260 F grades. But I think it was right around the same, maybe about 120. And I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I can get that to you, but it wasn't obviously, that same number of students. Some students.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I mean, it makes a difference, right? Particularly when we're talking about, this topic and you see like a number like 200. And I think it's important for us to know, right? Like I, as an individual, could be holding, 5 of those or 6 of those. And so thinking about percentage of students who are failing, I think makes a difference in terms of how we think about the numbers and the relative success that some of our students on the margins are either finding or not finding. So I appreciate that, you getting that information.
Absolutely. It doesn't mean 230 some discrete students were struggling in that. And some students just across the board are receiving multiple Fs. But I will say on the flip side of that too, you have like 4,000 A's too. So, something was working.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. All right, so moving to participation. I really appreciated these slides. I know we spent a lot of time at the beginning of the year, Virtual 2.0, talking about the difference between sort of attendance and engagement and participation and in the various ways that we've measured that. Do we have grade level breakdown of some of that information? I know that you asked like the questions around kind of perceived participation it was presented here as a unit. I'm just curious to see whether or not there were differences in terms of elementary versus middle versus high school.
The survey was pretty simple, wanting to make it as easy as possible for teachers to complete. So we did ask teachers sort of what building was their primary location. So we could break it out by that, but not a specific grade level. We didn't ask that.
Okay. I think that could potentially be an interesting thing to know, especially as we think about this. I think, Peter, your comment around kind of revisiting some of this data, and if we think about this as sort of like mid-level baseline, if you will, to think about, where our engagement challenges are and if they're concentrating in a particular way, right? Like with any intervention, then we can concentrate our supports there in a different way. And then I was thinking about that as it relates to trends as well. And I saw that in one of the comments, and I appreciated that you included that comment around like, we've noticed a change in engagement, which I think when you think about the normal ebb and flow of an academic year is also not atypical, right? I mean, you start the year with a level of energy, you get into a rhythm and a routine, and you may see those things fall off. And so, I expect that we don't have any data on like trends, like thinking about the beginning of the year versus thinking about now, but that would be something that I think moving forward as we sort of collect end of the year data or whatever we go next, that we think about those ebbs and flows of engagement and see if whether or not we can glean anything like more substantial with that as just, how are kids moving in and out of engagement as part of the natural ebb and flow of the school year.
And if I could just add a thought to
yes,
that.
Lisa, I always love when you add a thought.
At the beginning of the year with Virtual Learning 2.0, it was significantly different than the, sort of emergency virtual learning from the end of the previous year. And teachers were really, getting used to what will this mean to have all my students virtual, and how am I adjusting my pacing of my lessons, and what's synchronous and what's not. And, the synchronous part was new, those expectations. So I guess I just want to make a comment tied to how challenging it is to try to have like an apples to apples kind of comparison when there are new events like now hybrid, and having to rethink about instruction in that way. You almost feel like you're starting over. So it won't seem like a consistent school year held together September through June. It's basically, I think, in a lot of ways feeling like, the first semester virtual learning, teachers were getting better at it, kids were getting better at it, kind of hit a stride with it. And now we're transitioning into hybrid, and that may take a while to hit a stride again. But we might see a boost with students feeling excited to be in the building, those who are choosing hybrid. There's just so many things at play.
Yeah, I appreciate that context, Lisa, and I completely agree with you, right? That there's a variety of variables, and so this idea of being able to say like, okay, I can draw from August to now or whatever in this really nice, clean way is just, I mean, it's not possible. It's messy, and I think that and I think you speak a lot in the language around like continuous improvement, for example, right? I mean, that's how you orient constantly when you're here talking about what we've learned and what we've applied. And so, being able to think about it through that lens too, like here's what we've noticed, here's what we've been able to apply, here are the changes that we've seen, given all the noise that's around it, I still think is a useful discussion to have. Okay, last question, and then I will yield my time to the rest of my board colleagues who I'm sure have many questions. In regards to SEL, Krista, I really appreciate the demographic breakdowns that you gave in terms of, kind of how staff are feeling at each particular level. A wondering that I had, and maybe this is better for Chris and Mitch, is it was unsurprising to me to see their elementary staff say that they've spent more focus on SEL at the universal level. I think that was pretty obvious. I had a good view of it as a parent. I was a little surprised that was not reported at middle school and high school. And I was curious about what insights you might have there in terms of kind of why that might not have been the case, particularly because, at the adolescent age, that it's super important in terms of connectedness and peer interaction. And obviously that's a huge barrier in virtual learning. So just wanted to get your insights on why there might be some individual differences there between what we saw at elementary versus what was reported at middle school and high school.
Yeah, I can speak to that. When I first looked at it too, Elizabeth, I was kind of in shock and it kind of caused me concern. But then I started thinking about it and started thinking through kind of how the middle school model works. In the elementary model, you have a few more counselors spread out over a few more schools working together to bring something to the kids. And in the form of a program, in the form of a regular classroom program. In the middle school, we have 4 members of our student services team that their primary function when we're in person is working directly with kids. Like they're out going into classes, seeing kids in the hallways, they're building the relationships. And so without that one-to-one contact, like I think there was times this year when we kind of struggled, like we had to, dial up and call and connect with everybody. And so then even when you see a variance of 15 to 30, for the middle school, to me, that's one counselor probably reporting 30 and one reporting 15 and 2 somewhere in the middle. So, I think that I think they're maybe underestimating themselves a little bit because of the work they have done with our advisory has been extremely good and every day. And very much appreciated by students, parents, and staff. But they just miss the connectedness. And I think that's the one thing that I would like to just point out is like when we work in the middle school, when we're in person in normal schooling, like we often talk about how it takes a village to support our most reluctant learners. Like all of us, whether it's administration, student services, teachers, we all try to connect with the kids that need us the most. And for our teachers to be kind of on their own at times and virtual, like, yep, there's a few more F's, but you know what? For the grades to be where they're at and for the attendance and the engagement to be where it's at, it's kind of amazing. Because when we're in service, how all of us work together and work to build the relationships, that's what we do. And it's much harder virtually. So for what it's worth.
Well, and Chris, you said it, but I think it bears repeating. I will say, like, having access to sort of the details of their response, there's a little bit of underselling, particularly at the 6-8 level. I want to be authentic and share what folks shared, but I also know the work that they're doing and some of the things that they maybe weren't reflecting our universal level work. I can tell you within the responses, there's some definite underreporting of what the work has been and how it supports the universal level. So, but I think it speaks to like the slump of this time of the year too. Like, people are just, it's the work is different. It's getting old. Like it's hard. It's, and I think they're maybe losing sight a little bit of like, yeah, I need this re-energization. Everybody needs that as well too. And so I think it's maybe a little reflective of the time and not giving credit perhaps. Mitch, I'm happy to hear from you as well. I think there's a little bit of that on the secondary high school side as well.
Just one more quick thing, Elizabeth, when you were talking about trends and stuff, I think we can't forget either, and Mitch will agree with me on this. Like we've had COVID going on, but we've also had Black Lives Matter. We've had, you know, things going on in our country. Like all of these have different effects on our kids, significant different effects on our kids and families. And so like our trends, like even bad weather, cold weather, and when winter hit, definitely had an effect. When kids couldn't get outside as much, had an effect. So there's things that have an effect on our learning and on our engagement, more so in virtual than we've experienced before.
Eric?
I think Lorraine was before me. I'll go after
Oh,
Lorraine.
was she? Okay, Lorraine.
Thank you. So my question is, well, I actually have two questions. So I guess either Lisa can address it or the principals. So Lisa, you talked a lot about engagement. Is engagement being tracked by each student? And is that part of the grade?
Great question, Lorraine. So engagement per se is not part of a grade in terms of if students have, let's say, asking questions while they're on a virtual class or engaging in a breakout room or something like that. Obviously, though, the more engaged they are, the participation of completing their assignments, handing in, you know, the assessments, et cetera, that does factor into the grade. Teachers do have certain grade calculations that they use at the secondary level. So when I showed the middle school grades and I was showing you the K and S grades, that's the knowledge and skills grade, there is a portion that's also reported separately called effort at the middle school. And then at the high school, the K and S grade and an effort grade is sort of averaged together. But I will say more often than not, effort is measured in that instance as, like if I'm doing a formative check on a student, it might be something that goes into an effort grade and it's not a summative assessment grade. So summative assessment, more end of learning, is what sort of carries the weight in a knowledge and skill grade, where some of the homework assignments, when you're in the process of learning, those maybe go more in the effort grade. So the survey results shared here, strictly teachers, their own sort of qualitative impressions of how students were engaging. It did not ask for any kind of like quantitative, are you making a check every day in a you know, spreadsheet of sorts to see if students are engaging. But teachers definitely know who their students are, that they spend time, extra time reaching out to, and then which students are just like always sort of, you know, raising their hand or offering a thought during class as well.
Thank you for the clarification, Lisa. The other question I had is in regards to students of color and where they fall with the grades. So I'm glad to see that there are a lot more A's, but obviously the F's I'm concerned about, and I'm wondering if students of color are impacted by that.
I did not pull a specific demographic breakout by race or ethnicity on these grade reports. So I don't have that information to share, but could get that. I will say that in general, when we're looking at assessment results with the demographic breakdown in the past, you know, it can vary by the grade level or the class or the actual assessment. So you know, sometimes you might notice something with students of color in particular, but sometimes in like, let's say an iReady or a map or something like that, you'll see it's proportional. So I'll let Mitch maybe speak to that a little bit more about the high school grades per se.
Yeah, we report out to our by department, our F data, total Fs in each department and class. And at the quarter, we did break that down by demographic. I was just looking for the semester demographic here report, but we do pull that data and look at it as a staff. It was disproportionate. I don't remember the numbers offhand for the number of Fs, but I can certainly get that to you.
I would be really interested in that data. Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah, just to circle back on our total number of Fs at the high school, it was 107 individual students. I think I said 106, but just to confirm is 107.
Eric?
Hey, Lorene, that's a great question. And that's something that we're going to hopefully get a chance to talk about at the next Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee about that data of grades as far as demographics. So, or at least Dan and I were talking about getting that on the agenda. So hopefully we can get that information then. I have one question for Lisa, and then Andrew, if you could come back to me before we go to Jared. I have another question I'd like to ask Dan, but I want to wait on that one. But my question, Lisa, is regarding the pass, those pass percentages, the 4% and the 1.9%. Can you explain what the pass is and what it means and why there was a difference between the numbers that it decreased?
So in general, a pass grade is not used very often, but there are some times when you are looking at just, is the student doing enough to earn the credit or not? And so again, we don't use that a P very often. And so your specific question is, I'm going to pull up the slide. I'm sorry, is like at the high school?
There was actually a decrease in the amount of passes given out. Yeah, I'm just curious, why was there a decrease when we went to online learning?
Again, Mitch, can you speak to the unpacking of the pass at all for that?
I would have to look into the pass grade and the numbers and the difference there.
Okay,
it's such a rarity because normally we just don't use, like, I mean, what we did use second semester of last school year was the pass, no pass grading. Once we went into, again, school shut down in March, we still had a whole quarter to go. And so when we came to, end of the year, that was something that at the secondary level was much more common. This is first semester data. And so you'll see that just pass grade is not something that we use very often.
I could speak real quickly to the middle school. Our pass situation is purely individual circumstantial, such as a student maybe starts at GDS like somewhere in the middle of a term, or a student is only taking a few classes due to something else. Could be hospitalization, could be some kind of anything. It could be some kind of certain situations are the only times that we certain situations or certain abilities or disabilities are the only times that we resort to using a pass. So it's all very individual situations. Otherwise, we use the grading system.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have for now.
Okay. Is there any more questions, board members? Okay.
Wait, can you come back to me then?
I'd like to come back to Eric.
Thank you, Andrew. I guess I just want to talk to the other board members and to Dan and just reiterate the importance, I think, of continuing to move forward now that we have hybrid learning models and plans that are being implemented at all grade levels. I would still like us to consider and look at the 4-day models, whether that's a hybrid 4-day or a full 4-day. And I know that now the public health metrics are changing And they're constantly changing, so we have to adapt to them. But I think the 6 foot, I'm wondering if that 6 foot criteria is going to be changed to 3. I don't know if it will or not, but that could increase the possibility of having moving into a different type of model. And then also, Dan, if we could maybe start the discussion about next school year and what that might look like, and maybe have maybe get that on the agenda, just to kind of foreshadow, you know, the planning of what would be involved, worst case scenario, best case scenario, and stuff like that.
Okay, sure, thank you.
Okay, I think that's it. Dan, did you have anything else for the superintendent's report?
Nope, that's it tonight.
All righty. Go ahead to the Director of Business Service, Jared.
Yes, I would like to report tonight out on the second Friday enrollment counts. So just as a quick refresher, each year the school district has 2 enrollment counts that we need to report to the Department of Public Instruction. The first enrollment report is our 3rd Friday count, which happens in September. And that's really the driving force of our revenue limits, which, as we all know, revenue limits gives us the total amount of money that the district can collect between equalization aid from the state and then what is remaining that's passed along to our property taxpayers. And then the second Friday count is actually what is used for next year's equalization aid calculation. So it is a financial picture. It goes into our financial picture, but it's not a number that's going to give us additional funds or take away funds to grow the overall budget. It definitely shifts money one way or the other, depending on who's responsible for providing that money to the district. As a district, we're a negative aided school district. So that means that in the eyes of the states, each of our students carry more of a property value, which means that in the eyes of DPI, our property taxpayers can pick up more of that portion of our revenue limit. So that's why we do lose state aid overall, just because of our property value. So the data that I have given you that's in public content as well, it goes back to September of 2016. So it has both a September 3rd Friday count, a second Friday count. The very last column that's highlighted in yellow is our official second Friday count, and that means kids in seats. As you can see, we have a total enrollment as of that January 8th date of 3,424, which is a reduction of 25 students from what we had reported on 3rd Friday. And those students would be students that have left the district in many different aspects. They might have open enrolled, which means that we will still count them as a resident, but not as a resident in seats. Some of these students might have moved to a private school or moved to homeschool. So private school students and home school students, we do not get to count for any purpose of either revenue or either both revenue limits and equalization aid. And if you look back to second Friday to second Friday, so last January to this January, we've lost approximately 86 students. It does give you a breakdown by each school to show you residents and non-residents, and then also gives you a total non-residents. What we're seeing is the school choice side of things is we do continue to receive applications to come into our district. However, we've seen the reduction on our resident enrollment. So if we look at our 3rd Friday count, we had about just over 3,000 students. And on second Friday for residents, we're at 2,980.
Eric?
Jared, what is the effect of, let's say, if a family open enrolled this year or because of the pandemic and then wanted to come back the next year into the district? Would that have an effect on us as a district as far as our allocation and budget?
So if we had a family that chose to open enroll out of our district?
Yeah, out of the district, like let's say this semester, sometime during this semester, and then with the plans of getting back into the district next year?
Yep. So that situation is that we would pay the school in which they are open enrolled to a dollar amount per day that they went to, but we did count those students on our third Friday count. So we did collect state aid and revenue from property taxes on that student, and then we passed that along. So it is on a proration per day, and then when they come back, they would just be in our seats, and they will continue to stay in our counts. Where we get the bigger negative effect is if a family chooses to move to private school or a homeschooling situation, then they completely get removed from our accounts, and there's no exchanging of money, but there's no collecting of money for that.
So not as big as effect if it's the open enrollment, but when they are removed into a private school, that's a bigger impact.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay, and Andrew, I do have one final piece if there's no more
Go ahead.
questions. All right, one other piece I should have included in the reopening report. I'm gonna go back to Jared. I'd like to report out a quick update with regard to the pool availability.
Yes, so we are, our girls swim team is now fully in practice mode, and we'll start having meets. So that means that our final piece of the puzzle for our aquatic center is in place. And so I'm pleased to announce that we will be sharing with our public starting tomorrow that beginning on Monday the 15th, we will be reopening the aquatic center to our public, and we'll be offering a multiple different things like we did before. The one thing that we won't be offering is swim lessons, because obviously those are things that we still need to work through with public health. But we'll offer lap swim early in the morning. We will have open swim for families to come, and it will be open 7 days a week. And on the weekends, it will be in that morning time slot from 8 to 12. Some of the protocols that we have put in place is that no one can just drop in. You will have to sign up on our website. There will be no cash exchanging that's happening. So everything will be done through debit or credit card and in advance. So we're really excited about it. Our pool staff have worked really hard and is anxious to get people into the pool. And so that will be our first step of starting to welcome outside individuals back into our school. And the other safety part of it is that we will not have any public participation before our swim team. So for example, our girls swim team does have some practices early morning around 7 o'clock. And typically we open up lap swim around 6 o'clock. So on the days that the swim team is going to be in there early morning, we will not have an open swim just to keep our public and our students separated. But on those other days, we will have both morning, midday, and afternoon and evening slots available to the public.
Okay. Thank you, Jared. Moving on to board reports. Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee, Eric.
Yeah, we met on January 19th. We discussed possibly or exploring more support positions for the high school, like the student family engagement specialist, continuing to work with the policy committee to develop a policy related to race and equity, continue with community informational meetings and community information and feedback, and also reviewing the SRO policy and its effects on students and schools. And our next meeting is February 16th.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Ad hoc Sustainability Committee, Peter.
Thank you. We have had 2 meetings since I reported last. The first was on, which was it, the 16th, and the second on February 2nd. At the first meeting, we did approve and finalize the final draft for submission of the EIGP grant application for the solar on the high school project that we proposed. And that was submitted on time, submitted on time as, I forget now, 100 and some, there's 100 and some applications. We do note that there is funding available for about 30% of the proposals that they received, which is sort of what we were expecting. So there's about a chance of about a third chance, or hopefully better than that, considering the merits of the application of us being able to move forward with this and receiving the grant. At the meeting on the 2nd, which was after the grant application was submitted, we took the approach to look at the schedule and talk about some of the items before us as if we wanted to, if we assumed we were going to get the grant and wanted to proceed. And the reason we wanted to do that is if we do get this grant, the schedule would be pretty tight because we would want to get the work done before the end of the summer so that there's not construction and so on in the parking lot of the high school when school opens in September. And to get there, we would have to have a tight schedule. Now, working with McKinstry and the schedule they developed, we don't think that that's a problem. We think we can move forward with that, but there are some things that we would want to sort of get started on prior to just acting on assuming that on the presumption that we would get the grant. Nothing that would commit the district to anything or spend a significant amount of money until we know for sure. But what would be an issue with the schedule is that we have proposed that part of this be financed by borrowing the money, and the school portion would be financed by borrowing the money, and then we would pay the finance charges back out of the savings we would get. However, in order to borrow that money, there's a 30-day period of public comment. And if we wait till after we know that we get this grant, we've got this grant, then that 30-day period becomes a problem, becomes a delay for moving forward for the project. So as we talk about this and move forward, we may be asking the board to start the process of approving the financing. Of course, that would be entirely dependent on whether we get the grant, we can move forward, everything works out, we can move forward. But we may want to, before we know whether or not we have the grant in hand, we may want to just start that process so we can get to that 30-day public comment period without it delaying the grant, delaying the project if we do get the grant and do want to move forward. There was another issue that was raised, which is that this is federal money and it will come with it. With it will come requirements that the federal government puts on contracts regarding things like diversity and small business opportunities, minority-owned business opportunity, and so on. Things that major contractors, a lot of people who do public contracting and are familiar with federal dollars are familiar with. And one of the questions that was raised by the committee was whether the district has similar things in its purchasing purchasing policy. And the answer is not really. So one of the questions that came up, well, say the district is going to enter into a large contract, which we would, if we receive this grant, we would enter into a large contract, say for solar panels. Question is, this would be covered by the federal requirements, but in the future, if we're not covered with, if we're not involving federal money, would the school district, would we want to have some thought in our purchasing policy for large purchases that that are consistent with our values and our efforts to improve diversity? So that that was brought up, and we did have we did ask Susan Manning on the policy committee to think about that, I think it might be something worth discussing if we wanted to do it as a board in a district moving forward. If we want to add some of the diversity things that we believe are, in agreement with our mission and our strategic plan to our own purchasing policy. Some school districts have them, and there's templates and there's information out there. So that was an interesting, part of side part of the discussion that came up, and something that has spun out of this, so we might want to talk about. Dan or Jared, did you have anything to add to that? what I've said, that conversation? Okay.
Susan Manning. I mean, Susan Fox, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Well, I just had a question, and I I didn't listen to your meeting, but when I read your agenda and then saw some of those documents, I was a little surprised. I understand the wanting to get this moving, but I guess I think we need to not lose sight of the fact that
Whoops.
any negotiation with McKinstry has to be done through Jared and his office. That can't be done through a committee. And
Yes.
it has to be okay to have that additional work on his plate and Dan's plate. And I guess I just want to make sure that they are involved in any of that. And I don't know if you have any thought about that at this point, Jared, or, I mean, I'm not sure what I think about us approving money before we know we have it. I mean, I get the 30-day comment period. I get that that's a slowdown, but I think we also have to be realistic about what we can do and what our staff can do. But so I hope that any planning like that, I would assume that you'd be meeting with Jared before your committee meetings, for example, or Jared and Dan, so that they're very much in the loop of all of this too, and we're not getting ahead of what they feel they can handle.
No, that's obviously important to me and to the committee, because I know we can't go anywhere without the support of Jared and Dan, and I understand the issues to their bandwidth and what they can do. And I've been pleased and surprised, actually, the support that they've given this project, because I've been concerned about bringing it forward.
Well, and you made the point of the last week that when you first talked to Jared, he had been already kind of thinking about this.
That's right, exactly.
So it was not that he didn't welcome it. I'm just, there's so much going on. I'm just curious, but it looked very well thought out, and I just want to make sure we follow the processes, et cetera.
Right.
So thanks.
Yeah. And just to be clear, we wouldn't, I have to see exactly what it is we're doing, but the idea is that we would just start the process to get the public comment. We would not commit to borrowing any money. There would be no commitments financially before we find out whether we have the grant approval or not.
See, that's part of what I wasn't clear about, whether legally that's the same thing. I mean, it seemed to me that once we approve a resolution to borrow, then there's a 30-day. So we just need to be really sure we're doing it correctly.
Right. Yeah, but the point is that we don't actually have to borrow the money.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, got it.
Right. Yeah, there's nothing at the end of that 30-day comment period that requires us to borrow the money.
Okay, well, and the other thing is that if you start working on this, I just go back to my comment last time, because I didn't see anything in the way the proposal was written about thinking through curricular materials and things like that and including them in the borrowing. I just think it's worth giving some thought to that.
Right, and that actually will be the topic of our next meeting, is what we want to do to help structure what we can do to help structure this in such a way that our staff can take advantage of any educational opportunities that are presented. In other words, what can we build in that helps them out?
Right. Okay. Great.
Susan Manning.
Yeah, I actually did listen in on the committee, and I think we do need to kind of look at our policies in relation to the points that were made at that meeting, so that we can make sure that we're properly supporting the grant and the project. The other thing that the timing is, again, when you listen to the meeting, it is may create issues. But I think that one of the critical issues is, and I know generally the board really is very, very interested in this project, but we still have to think about, this is an advisory committee, and all the work that they do needs to come and get full board approval. So, and Peter was very open about talking about expenses, but for example, they talked about a $8,500 project.
Structural analysis
The McKinstry would have to do. And one of the understandings of the committee is it didn't need board approval to be put out, because it was under the $10,000, which is accurate. However, again, board approval for the project, recommendations to the committee, might be tough and challenging. So again, the more we hear about this project, the more involved we are, listening to the committee meetings, and then getting on board with a board decision about this project. If they're going to move forward, it's going to be really important. And I think those are some of the nuances that Susan was talking about. The biggest issue is this is advisory and it requires board approval. Very much like Katie's job. When the committee came forward recommending that we have a communication person, that committee really was 100% behind it and believed it was important and that was going to happen.
Yep.
Kind of like the changing of the names of the school. I mean, that committee came forward thinking that was what was going to happen. So the critical piece being it's advisory, and the board has to seriously think about timing and moving forward on this. If it's going to work.
You know, my perspective, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have a schedule put together so we could talk about it, because what I need to do is before the board needs to make any decisions, make any approvals or anything, I need to make sure that I can bring these parts to the board or bring the whole thing to the board for discussion and approval as we need it. But I needed to see the schedule so that I can see exactly how to work this in with with the board's work, so that we can see as a committee, actually not just me, but how to work this in. And so it's important to talk about the schedule. Unfortunately, the grant schedule it doesn't work very well with school district schedules, because they're asking for they're giving the money out in March and they're asking for completion within a year. Well, that means, in school terms, if you're doing construction, that means you have to do it by the end of summer. So there's not very much time. But I'm certainly going to bring these parts that we need approval, and actually the whole project to the board for approval before we move forward, before the district is committed to anything. Give you plenty of time to think about that and make that decision.
So that's the end of the calendar year. The work has to be done, like as in December.
It had to be done. They want it March to March. They're going to do March to March.
March. Okay. Well, that's a little better. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But the problem is just the biggest problem is parking.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Like I can speak to some of like the timelines that Peter had talked about, but I wasn't for sure if you wanted to talk about it now or part of the discussion item later on in the agenda.
Yeah, I mean, we can go ahead. I don't actually have anything for that discussion on the agenda. That was actually this. These are the things I'm talking about now. I wasn't aware that it was on the agenda as a separate item, actually. And so I've talked about everything. So now it's probably a good time to do it.
All right, so I'll just briefly talk about how the funding would work, or those criteria that we need, as it sort of we talked about with the sustainability committee. So as Peter has mentioned, we're supposed to hear about the grants by the end of March. And we had applied, for that maximum amount of about $250,000. So since this is a borrowing that's going to happen outside of a referendum approved debt, it will run through Fund 38, like I've mentioned before, and those debt payments between principal and interest would be offset by the savings that we would get from the value of solar. So those are the, ensuring that it's a cash flow positive. And there are a couple of different mechanisms that we can move forward with borrowing in Fund 38, which the district has done, multiple times, specifically with our different phases of our energy efficiency projects with McKinstry. you've all heard that the district has the ability to borrow up to $1 million, and that up to $1 million doesn't require like any like 30-day petition periods or public hearings, but that's an accumulative amount of money. And we've used some of that over the years that we still are borrowing. So that sort of puts that on the side table. So then it comes to looking at this as a cash flow item of being over $1 million potentially, or even shortly under $1 million for borrowing. But then we talk about 10 years or more than 10 years. And that is sort of that threshold of determining if the district needs to do a public hearing and then a 30-day petition period, or just a straight up 30-day petition period. And so when we talk about a 30-day petition period, that gives the electric of our community, after the board approves a resolution that they're authorizing us to move forward with the borrowing. And this authorization does not require the board to actually ultimately borrow the money. It's similar to a referendum. So when we go out for a referendum, we get the authority to exceed our revenue limit or to sell bonds to build some, but the board never has to take that next step and finalize that. It can just sit there and that authority is there until it expires. And that's the same thing with the petition period. So based on some of the numbers that we're running and looking at receiving the grant, it does look like that we're most likely going to be over that 10-year borrowing span, which would require the board to approve a resolution to borrow up to a certain dollar amount. So we don't have to have that final dollar amount, which then the board would publish a publication in the newspaper. We would hold a public hearing. And then after the public hearing, we have that 30-day petition period that starts. And that petition period gives the opportunity for anybody in the electric to get, I think it's 10% of the signatures to object to this borrowing of who voted in the last governor's election. So it's somewhat, a fairly high threshold, but it's the opportunity for our electric to voice. And if they meet that threshold, it stops the process. The board doesn't have the ability to hold another public hearing and try. It literally stops the borrowing. It doesn't force a referendum. It forces the board to make a decision what they want to do. So when we were working with McKinstry, the $8,500 comment, agreement is an engineering study. And so in order for McKinstry to actually issue an RFP and actually design a project, they need to have some engineering costs that go into it. Well, obviously, McKinstry is well aware that a lot of this project or the moving forward of this project is dependent on that grants. And that's what really makes it cash flow right now. I mean, obviously we can continue to look at different options, but that's what we're looking at right now, is that we have to receive that grant to obviously make this a cash flow positive and move forward. So in order for them to do that, the district can actually enter into a engineering study with them, that if the district did not move forward with the plans and issue the RFP and then issue a contract or with McKinstry, the district would be liable for that $8,500 that would pay for that engineering services. Now, as we talked about at the ad hoc committee meeting, is that it's not like we're doing something and then we've wasted $8,500. That study would also help us be prepared for the next round or as we continue to explore that. If we move forward and we get the grants and we get the authority to do the borrowing, that $8,500 is not a cost to us because it's wrapped into the flat fee or the percentage that McKinstry adds on to the project. And that's part of that ongoing percentage cost that we've had in all of our contracts with all the phases that we had. So the only time that we would be required to pay that $8,500 is if we didn't get the grant. And so as we were talking about trying to meet some of those timelines, and if we wanted to ensure that we got it done this summer, because obviously the grant requires it to be done by the following March. And that's if they are on time of announcing the grant as well. But if you did happen, and this is a tentative timeline I've had an opportunity to talk with PMA about, is if at the next board meeting, the board felt comfortable, issuing a resolution to hold a public hearing and start that 30-day. Because I would advise the board not to sign any contracts or commit anything until we know that we got the grants. And then obviously we have to wait for that 30-day petition period, which would then, if, based on when the public hearing could be held in the 30 days, it might push us a little bit past our April board meeting. However, there are some things that we could put in place at that April board meeting. And the board has done this before, is approve a resolution or a parameters of the borrowing, which would say that if the grant is awarded, which we would know hopefully by that April, I think, board meeting. And then the only thing that we would not have finalized is what that petition period looks like. Then we wouldn't need to wait to come back to like a May board meeting, is we would have all that worked out with PMA to say, it can only be up to this amount. It would be within these parameters that the board has already authorized. So then we could start the borrowing of that. But that would be the only thing that it would allow that 30-day petition period to start before awarding the grant, just knowing that if the petition period, comes back and there's enough signatures, obviously that stops the process. But also in the resolution or the motion that's approved, it can also be stated that obviously if the grant's not awarded, we're not going to enter. Because the other part of it is the board has to approve the contract with McKinstry. And that would be a separate board action as well. That would not happen in March. That would have to happen upon knowing our funding sources for that, the project.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the question to the board was, do we want to approve this in March before we have the final information on essentially whether or not we get the grant, or do we want to approve this in April after we have that information? But in order to do that, we're going to have to start the process on the financing before we approve. If there's any thoughts.
Well, I guess I'd like to hear Jared's recommendation on that.
I do believe that with working with Quarles and Brady and PMA, there would be enough safeguards in place for the board to start the process before knowing the grants. And knowing that we would not enter into any type of contract with McKinstry, because once you enter into the contract with McKinstry, that is really what's committing the board to move forward. So if we offer the resolution to borrow up to a certain dollar amount, we have a public hearing that starts a 30-day petition period. And then at the end of the day, if the grant comes back and it's not successful, the board still doesn't have to do anything. It's that ends it. Or the board might want to have some more conversation. Now we have the authority to borrow up to a certain dollar amount, and maybe we look at financing over 16 or 17 years versus maybe 12 or 13. So there still has that ability. But then, if that's the case, we probably might not even end up doing it over the summer, because obviously we could have some more conversation about it because we don't have a deadline based on the grants. So I do believe there would be enough safeguards in place if the board felt comfortable to be able to have that public hearing and starting the 30-day petition period, knowing that the board doesn't have to actually act on anything, and then the board would ultimately have to approve the contract with McKinsey.
That said, I will, whether or not we approve it, I will bring a more detailed information, much information as I have, to the March meeting, so that everybody on the board is familiar with everything knows everything I do about the project, the potential project.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Moving to Monona Grove Education Foundation, Susan Manning.
Thank you very much. The Monona Grove Education Foundation met on Tuesday afternoon. Probably they are continuing to work very hard. They have a really good group of people on raising funds and spending, thoughtfully allocating funds to basically initiative grants, kind of new types of things. They've been kind of on hold on those grants because things have been changing during the pandemic. But they're focusing very seriously right now on work that directly impacts students, particularly in supporting students and families, food, clothing, basic needs, which is kind of a major project for them right now. Andrew Kitzler has just resigned from the Monona Grove Education Foundation Board. He'll be working on another project for the city of Monona in relation to San Damiano. And so he felt he needed to be able to dedicate himself. He has great, he works for the University Foundation, so he has great fundraising background. They have, Jason McCutcheon has appointed Kathy Klinke to serve in Andrew's position through the end of December. And Dan did provide an update, and probably will have more specific information at their next meeting about the specific projects they're working on for students. And I know they're working directly with Dan on those projects. Dan, was there anything more specifically that they?
Yeah, one in particular, through their Parent Forward program and providing snacks and meals for students. And so I give some additional details. They were still working through it, but very exciting about that opportunity and partnering with them.
And they are definitely working with Dan and administration as they're providing those services.
Yeah, and Krista Foster.
I think, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
part of that.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Next is the State Education Convention. As everybody's aware, this was a different way of doing it. We had to do it virtual. So I don't know if any board member attended anything. If they did, if they'd like to share one thing that they attended, I'll give you the floor. If anyone wants to share anything. Susan Manning.
I just say their equity programs are absolutely excellent, and they were all across the board from lots of different types of districts. They were just done extremely well, and the way they formatted it was just, as always, there's like 5 programs you want to go to at the exact same time, but now they taped everything so you can go back through the end of the year and watch these programs. They also worked very seriously on programs and strategies to achieve success for every student, which were also very interesting. And then plans and strategies, district strategic plans, and putting those together. And it turned out to be an absolutely excellent program. And you actually could see more educational programs this way than you could when you were actually in person at the meeting, because they taped them.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I did have an opportunity to attend some of the sessions. I focused on some sustainability sessions and some of the diversity discussions. There's always interesting things, and I do appreciate the opportunity every year that comes around to attend these the meetings and meet other board members, hear from other board members, hear from other boards, and hear these presentations. There's always new stuff. I always learn things, and I appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Susan Fox?
I also attended a few, and when I first looked at it, I didn't think there was that much new, but I got a lot out of the ones I did attend, and one was about communication and kind of in this time period, and everybody's facing similar challenges, similar kind of battles within their community over how to handle this and what to do, and different a lot of communication challenges as well. Hudson had an interesting, I mean, one of the things they did was they got t-shirts for the kids: be patient, be kind, keep others in mind, which I thought was kind of a cool saying. But they talked a lot about the need, for empathy and understanding, and how difficult this is for everyone. And I attended one on Act 33 again, which I often do. David O'Connor is a great speaker from DPI on American Indian issues, and in Wisconsin in particular. And I always email Lisa after this and ask her to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to do with regard to that. And she said our teachers have also been to his trainings, which is good. He's really excellent, and they offer a lot of stuff throughout the year. The was not really encouraging. They're looking at thinking the leadership on the committees kind of less school friendly. Finance is tight. We may be headed into some increasingly difficult times, which we kind of knew. So that was not real uplifting, but interesting nonetheless. So, and the governor gives his budget address next week, so we'll be talking about it more, and I'll be trying to follow that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. Anyone else? Lorraine?
Andrew, help me out. What was the football player's name that gave the inspirational speech? Help me out.
It was Donald Driver.
Donald Driver.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think of his name, but it was really inspirational. I really,
Yeah, he did a good job.
inspired. Yes. So I think that was one of the highlights of the meeting. So.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Okay. Just to let the community know that every school board has a delegate in Wisconsin, and I was a delegate for our school district. And we had 10 resolutions that we actually agreed and approved on to send to our legislations, hopefully to pass. The one that really got for me, because all schools are now and in the future will be suffering, is retiring teachers and staff and not able to fill in those positions. So we had a resolution to rehire some retired teachers and staff, which they would only come in to get pay. They will not get the medical and the dental and the vacations, I believe it was, because they got that in their retirement, but they would get rehired for pay, because the average new teachers that come into this field only average last 5 years now. So every school district around Wisconsin is now really suffering. And so for the teachers out there that's listening in our school district, please don't give up and quit on us. I know it's been tough. We need everyone on deck here. So I like to thank everybody's staff and the teachers that have put all the tireless hours in trying to make this thing work, and looking at the data. We know we still have work, and we'll just keep begging the community to just don't be the problem, be the solution with us, and help us out as we all into this together to educate our kids. So hopefully this will go to our assembly, get up to our state senators, and get this passed so we can get some good people back to help educate our kids. All right. Moving on to possible action items. The first one is participation in high school alternate fall and season and spring sports competition.
Okay, I'll kick it off. We do have Mr. Schreiner with us as well this evening to report out and answer any questions. So we had this listed as a possible action item because, as you recall, for our winter athletics, we asked the board to approve the ability to have competitions for our students. And so to our surprise, Public Health came out with emergency order number 13 on Monday, which reduced number of the restrictions. And so at this point, we no longer need board approval for permission for the alternative fall season and spring season. We are able to go ahead with the competitions within following the new order. So Mr. Schreiner did report out at the last board meeting as far as the schedules and so on for those seasons. So I guess at this point, unless Mr. Schreiner has something you'd like to share as well, but we can answer any questions that you might have with regard to what's happening, coming up. So.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'll just add a couple other points to the slides that I shared last time. Did look to put some more information together for this meeting that was consistent with what the order number 12 was, but finding out that order number 13 just kind of changed a lot of metrics on us. That's now shifted our box a little bit. Now we are planning to meet those guidelines with those increased numbers and stuff. But just some things to be mindful with this alternative season is this is a fall season that typically gets planned way out in advance. But in August 26th, we decided that we were going to move it to this time of the year. So our planning has really kind of been in and around this for a period of time now. Also to be mindful that this is not a normal season. A normal season is anywhere from 14 to 16 weeks long. This is going to be 8 weeks long for each of our sports seasons. So as our coaches come into it and kids come into it, it happens real quick. And so it's a different kind of feel. It's also a season that's mostly female sports. So we'll have 5 female sports going. That'll be girls swim, girls golf, cross country, girls tennis, and volleyball. We'll also have 3 male sports going: football, boys soccer, and cross country. And then also our dance team will have a chance to come back active and do some things in and around those sports. Our participation numbers right now coming off registration are strong. We're seeing real strong numbers with our freshman class. So we got a lot of excitement with kids coming in, and they're coming into our culture too. So that's exciting for us. Our coaches with this alternative fall season are excited to get at it. Just a little bit of kid contact that we've had this last month with our winter sports season, it does create a different feel for us. And so that's been real positive. Currently, right now, what we're trying to do is we've relocated our weight room down into our gym, which kind of pinches a little bit of our gym space, but we are working on gym availability as we end our winter seasons and try to transition in our alt seasons. And then we also have our spring coaches that are looking for contact time that they can start to shape up and get their seasons ready to go. Also, a thing to be mindful of is the start date and end date. And I will start to push that out to our families just to kind of get their heads wrapped around that and what we're looking at. Our coaches are now staging up their sport meetings for students and families and trying to get them on board. But we just had a hard shift on Tuesday with the new order coming in today with order 13. So we're working on those things. Our challenges are going to be obviously weather with some of our outdoor sports. So with that, we have, Dane County schools now are back on board where they can host some of these events. Our weather is an issue, so we've looked to transition some of those games to fields that are turf, just because schools don't want to rip up their natural grass this time of year because they still have a spring season coming in right behind this too, and that'll put a big hurt on that. So we're being mindful of that and moving some of our games to turf. Our indoor seasons for volleyball and girls swim still don't fall within the metrics of 25, so those sports, we are still going to be looking to go to facilities that can host us, that can hold larger numbers and stuff. Volleyball, that means we're going to be taking a few more trips to Beaver Dam to work on those games, and we'll be matched up with some other Dane County schools there. And then girls swim, we are also going to look to be going outside of the county where we can get larger numbers with schools that can host that. We may have some different schools on our schedules. Girls swim, we'll start to see Jefferson and Edgerton coming into that. But again, real positive that we are finding our events and these schedules are in place. Transportation, it's hard to know right now what we have. Jared's been asking me to try to get some transportation answers to him and stuff, but it's hard to pin that down. We can only have 26 per bus, and we're trying to figure out how many buses we are going to have after school, and then also what time can they go out after they drop kids off and then go clean up and be ready to roll for extracurricular stuff. We're not the only ones challenged by transportation. We talked about it today in our Badger conference meeting, and all schools are a little nervous about the transportation expectation to get our teams to sites. We just don't have that number of buses, but we do have a large number of kids to get there. So with that, it's just kind of a recap. I'll leave it at that and just kind of open it up for any questions that anybody would have.
Yeah, Jeff, I didn't hear, was track and field going to be included for boys and girls as well?
That will be a spring sport, so yeah, that'll be included.
Oh man, that's a lot.
Not during this alt season though. That'll come a little bit later on. They'll start up in May.
Okay.
Yeah, actually April 19th they'll start.
Okay. Eric?
Jeff, are these the fall sports that are moving to start in March? Are they going to be full seasons? And then my second follow-up question to that is, will they be able to play other teams in Dane County now that the orders changed?
Yes, they'll be full seasons, but keep in mind that what I said is that their full season is now 8 weeks instead of a normal 14-week season. So it'll have a start and an end, but also there's not a Badger Conference affiliation with this. Remember back in the fall, because some schools started in the fall and some schools decided to drift it to later on in the year. So there's no Badger Conference titles, no all conference teams. So there's schools that are still Badger Conference schools. We did match up with some of the Dane County schools, but some of those schools, like the Big 8 schools, Madison, Sun Prairie, Middleton, they've kind of stayed their own in their own Big 8 pocket. We did pick up some of the Janesville schools with their football teams, but again, our teams primarily consist of the Badger Conference, and it varies a little bit. So I'm just looking at my schedules right now, and for cross country, we'll have 8 different schools in there. Football, we're going to be looking at 11. Volleyball, we're going to be looking at 10, so it varies like that all the way through. Soccer, we're going to have 10 schools as well. So we got a pretty well-rounded schedule and everything in place. The nice thing for Monona Grove, though, is this, our stadium's going to go under renovation, so we're going to be a little displaced with that, but that's okay. Soccer, we're going to be looking at some of our community fields. So I should go back to football. Huska Park's going to come into play with us, where we may play some of our lower level football down there, JV and freshmen. And also with our soccer, we'll be looking at Bakken Park and Cottage Grove. So that gets our communities a chance to become active with us as well. The tough thing with it, though, is the timing. Usually we're not pounding fields this time of year. We're waiting until a couple weeks into April until it gets a little nicer, but we're going to try to get a start as soon as we can. I spent a lot of time last week with our alt fall coaches to get their staffs on board and get their head wrapped around our metrics and their COVID planning and stuff. And like I said, on Monday, all of a sudden we got a shift in the limitations and stuff. So now we're kind of rippling that plan a little bit, and we're also updating our district plan to best match that. So communication will be coming out shortly here to our families again to try to get them on board with that and start to answer some of their questions.
Thank you.
Was there any other questions? All right, hearing none. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to second one here. Second, resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of approximately 19,925,000 general obligation refunding bond series 2021.
So I'll start out, and then I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Weiberg, who is with PMA, who takes care of a lot of this refinancing for us. It's hard to believe that, I've been here for 11 years, and the first couple of years that I was here, we had taken advantage of refinancing a number of loans or bonds that we had, and whoever would have thought that interest rates would continue to fall even below that. And actually refinancing some of the ones that we refinanced. And so I'm pleased to have Michelle here to talk about an opportunity that we had, we took advantage of, and we're going to see with the combination of, using some fund balance in Fund 39 and the interest savings of over $900,000 that's going to be saved for taxpayers. So these are truly tax levy reductions. This isn't $900,000 to alleviate what we're paying out of our budget, but total property tax relief for our residents. So Michelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jared. Good to see everybody virtually. Jared, did I share the presentation that we sent earlier?
Yes, it is attached to the board docs.
Okay, great.
There you go. Yep.
Perfect. So the final borrowing amount for your resolution this evening, when you do make the motion, note that the final amount is $19,145,000. So that is the title of the issue itself. As Jared said, we took advantage of low interest rates. We went into the market this morning and bid out this refinancing, and we received the bids that you're seeing on this page from 9 different bidders. So we are in an incredibly low interest rate environment, perhaps the only positive related to the challenges we're facing in the world today. But not only do we have very low interest rates, but really not a lot of supply in the market. So a low interest rate environment coupled with tremendous demand. So we really witnessed that today with a lot of bidders coming to the market, bidding on these bonds, wanting to hold them and get them out to eventual investors. The low bid today received was from Piper Sandler at a true interest cost of basically a 0.40%. So as Jared said, we're refinancing a number of issues here, which we'll talk about in a moment, that when we issued that debt, we thought, could it get any lower? This debt that we're refinancing is at like 2%. So it's just tremendous that we're in an environment that we can find even lower interest rates and realize pretty significant savings. So the issue before you for approval tonight, again, is $19,145,000 general obligation refunding bonds. We're refinancing 4 different issues. It's just, it's great that all of these issues kind of line up in terms of when they became callable or eligible for prepayment. So it's the 2012 bonds, 2013 and 2014. All of that debt was issued in Fund 39, referendum approved debt issuances, as well as the 2013 bonds that were issued in Fund 38 for energy efficiency purposes. So 4 separate issues, 3 of them in Fund 39, 1 in Fund 38, but everything that is being refinanced is levied for outside of revenue limits. So as Jared said, any reduction in interest cost is going to be a reduction in what you need to levy for the taxpayers. This issue is dated and will close on March 3rd. Principal maturity dates match that of the old debt. So we're not extending the life of your debt whatsoever. And that's in 2022 through 28 with a first interest payment this coming November. Your Standard & Poor's rating was affirmed as a AA-. And again, the winning bidder that we saw on the previous page is Piper Sandler at a tick of a 0.40%. Total savings associated with the refinancing this evening, net of cost of issuance, is over $987,000. That is net of not only cost of issuance, but also the district is using $500,000 of available debt service fund balance to partially pay off the debt issue. So you had to issue less debt to pay off the old debt because you're using some cash on hand to pay that down as well. So the savings you're seeing again is net of both cost of issuance and is net of the cash that you're applying. And finally, this might be difficult to see on the screen, but what we just are seeing here is just a look at the overall debt service of the district. So before the refinancing, we had your total Fund 39 debt service, the energy efficiency debt service, for a grand total of debt service prior to the refinancing that was paid outside of revenue limits. and then after the refinancing, what that looks like. So I like that we accomplished a couple things here. We not only reduced your overall debt service and had savings of, as we said, nearly 990,000 of interest costs, but we also kind of smoothed out the debt structure. So you can see that what we have in this box here, prior to doing the refinancing, the debt service in those years bounced around a little bit. With the refinancing, we were able to really smooth it out. So we've got a nice smooth debt structure in 2022 through 26. And then you have a fairly significant drop in your debt service costs beginning in 2027. But again, overall savings net of cost of almost $990,000. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
I do.
Go ahead, Peter. I can't see anybody right now.
Okay. First of all, when I saw this document, I couldn't figure it out because the interest rate is 0.4%, and it just, it actually didn't make any sense to me. It took me a while to figure out that you were really talking about 0.4% interest rate and previously we thought 2% was pretty good. So to my colleagues on that board, that $987,000 is essentially free money. And to the free savings to the district. And the only question I would have, is there anything else we can refinance at these rates?
Yeah, there really isn't, with tax reform that was passed back in, it seems like a really, really long time ago. I think it was 2017, took away some of your flexibility as it relates to refinancings. So you can only refinance debt when you're essentially at the call date. So that is the situation here. Like I said, I think it's really nice that 4 issues lined up, all had kind of the same call date, so we could take advantage of all of it at once. There's just so many nice efficiencies of coming to market, with multiple purposes like that. But yeah, we've looked at everything, and these are the 4 issues we can take advantage of.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Nice call.
Was there any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Would anybody like to go ahead, Peter.
I'd like to move approval of the resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of approximately 19,925,000 general obligation refunding bonds, Series 2021.
Second.
I'm ahead. Susan Mann is second. Any further discussion?
We have to fix that amount. It's 19,145,000.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you guys want to?
No. I would. Let's see. Has it been seconded yet?
Yes.
Then we can.
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It was seconded.
Agrees. Right. Or, well, I guess, do you want me to amend it then?
Yeah.
All right. I would amend the motion to approve the resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of approximately $19,145,000 general obligation refunding bond, Series 2021.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Peter?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Susan Manny?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Lorraine?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Andrew? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries.
Except that we just approved the amendment. Now we have to approve the
Now we
main
have to do the motion.
amendment
Yeah.
as amended.
Eh.
Right? Yeah. So you just have to do the same vote again. Basically.
Okay. All right. So all in favor? Peter?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye, sorry.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Lorraine?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Andrew? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Could I just add a couple more things to a conversation earlier on the agenda about the borrowing related to the solar project? Everything that was said there was absolutely correct. When you adopt the initial resolution and go through the petition period. That is not binding whatsoever. It gives you the authority to borrow if in fact all the other stars align on that project and you want to move forward. You just have the authority to do so, and that authority lasts for 5 years. So from the date, I think, of the authorizing resolution itself, you've got 5 years to, if you get through all the petition and whatnot, to actually borrow the funds. So wanted to just close that loop while you had me here.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Good to see you all. Take care.
You too. All right, moving to the 2021-2022 capital projects budget.
Yes, so I presented that at the January board meeting, and there's been no changes, just asking for approval.
Can I have a motion for approval?
I'll make a,
Go ahead, Peter.
I
Eric,
move-
Eric, he was making a motion, but he went, there you go, Eric.
oh, sorry. I make a motion to approve the 2021-2022 capital projects budget.
I'll second it.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Lorraine,
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Susan Manning,
Aye.
Susan Fox,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Andrew, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. Next is indefeasible right of use, the IRU agreement with WIN LLC.
Yes, so just a little background. So back in 2013, when the district entered into the energy efficiency operational savings with McKinstry, we were able to incorporate an MOU with WIN to bring actually fiber to all of our buildings. So we were not relying on like a charter to provide phone lines in, that which then we were using for internet. And so now with the new school coming online, we have the opportunity to connect the new school to this dark fiber. And as laws have evolved, we discovered that an MOU isn't as upholding as this IRU agreement would be. So we worked with Boardman and Clark and WIN's legal counsel to take that MOU and combined it into this, so we have an official document that really outlines for the next 240 months of who's responsible for maintenance, because obviously fiber is laid alongside the road. So if Cottage Grove Road gets expanded, who's responsible for that? We know as a school district, we do not have the equipment to be worrying about, underground drilling. And if what happens if someone's doing a digging and digger's hotline needs to come out, who's reporting all that? So that's what's the importance of having an agreement like this with a company like with WIN. So the cost to us for the new school is covered under the referendum funds, which is approximately $41,285, but it outlines if something needs to happen for maintenance, what our responsibility is versus WIN. But like I said, this was completely reviewed by Boardman and Clark and brought in that previous MOU that was taken up by the board back in 2013.
Okay. Can I have a motion for approval?
I do have a question. Can you summarize what this means, what this contract does, who owns what, is responsible for what?
Yeah, so the actual dark fiber, or the fiber, is owned by WIN. And when they run that fiber, there's number of strands of actual fiber in there. So there's like 24 optic fibers that go through, and the district is getting 6 or 7 of those. And so what we're doing is, with this $41,000, is actually paying for it to be run from Bus Road or Cottage Grove Road to the new elementary school. So when WIN entered into this partnership with Muffin, which was part of the city of Madison, they were running these out for like the UW health clinics and stuff like that. So they make money off of running this. And so we were able to purchase a portion of those. And so our responsibility is the 6 or 7 strands that we have. They take care of all the maintenance. We just pay the maintenance. They're required to be on 24/7 notice to us. So if something happens, they are responsible for indicating where, getting all the permits from the village and Dane County and DNR, along with notifying Diggers Hotline. So anytime there's a call for Diggers Hotline, all that is incorporated into that. If there needs to be a change or a movement of the fiber, WIN takes care of that, and we pay our portion of that move. So we're not responsible for 100% of everything. It's more of a shared partnership, but they take all the responsibility of actually performing the work for us.
And then what does the word indefeasible mean?
I can't speak to that on a legal basis by any means there, Peter.
I think you can't get out of it, right? Something. I think it's, yeah.
All right. Then I'd make a motion for approval of the indefeasible right of use agreement with WIN LLC or WIN LLC.
Second.
All right. First and second, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, Lorraine,
Aye.
Eric, you just muted, Eric. Susan Manning,
Aye.
Susan Fox,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Andrew, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. Next is agreement for engineering services with Traffic Analysis and Design, Inc.
So this is an agreement for us to enter into, have someone come in and actually physically do what I will call, or what DPI calls, an unusual hazardous transportation plan. Ultimately, they were going to help us establish our walk zones, our areas that are not safe for students to walk, along with our transportation. So each school district is required to have this. State statute states that school districts are required by law to transport kids that live 2 miles or more from school. In order for us to have buses qualify for aid, we need to have, we do know that there are some areas around our schools, perhaps because they don't have sidewalks. It's a 4-lane road, there's stoplights, there's not crossing guards there that are within 2 miles of our school buildings, which in order for us to qualify for aid or be part of that transportation plan needs to have this unusual hazardous transportation plan. In the past, the sheriff's departments did this for free for school districts. At the end of the day, the sheriff's department has to approve it, but they no longer perform the service free of charge to districts. And I will tell you, there are not a lot of vendors out there that perform this type of service. And being, a data-oriented school district, yes, we can drive around and we can say, well, there's sidewalks here and there's not sidewalks here, and this should be safe and this shouldn't be safe. I've talked with Verona School District along with Sun Prairie School District, and they both recommended this vendor, and that's the reason I reached out to them. The other part of why we're doing this is next school year, we're opening up a new school, so we need to establish that. But while we're doing it, we're changing grade levels at Taylor Prairie, we're changing grade levels at Cottage Grove School, and I've been here for 11 years, and we haven't looked at our plans. And so that's why I've incorporated all of our schools 4K through 8, except for MG21 in the high school. And that may be something that we bring next year to the board to look at that. But really, we wanted to be able to come up with a plan that really takes data and takes that safety component and outlines what that needs to look like, especially since we have little kids that are moving around, wanting to ensure that we have a plan that meets the traffic safety along with the expectations of our community and our board.
Susan Manning.
Jared, I think it's because we've been here so long, but we've done a pretty extensive study on the Winnequa area, and there haven't been any dramatic traffic pattern changes that I'm aware of in the city of Monona. Other than, I mean, I don't think there've been any. We did some extensive studies on Nichols and crossing some of those streets within that 2 mile. So I was just wondering about the rationale for including Winnequa.
Nope,
I mean, again, the streets are changing rapidly in Cottage Grove, but
I think that's a great question. So part of the reason that I've chosen to include Winnequa is because when we moved our Maywood families, our students over to Winnequa, we never really did it at that time. I know we did an overall one when we had Maywood and Nichols and Winnequa all, working together or all have students in there. So that was part of the reason. And then there's obviously different placements of crossing guards. And by no means do I want to change this dramatically, but there's also opportunities for us to look at transportation and working with the city or the village. And if they place crossing guards at different locations, then that might expand the opportunity for kids to walk to school, or maybe based on where we have our crossing guards at, they would suggest that maybe we need to move it down a couple of blocks. And so that's the only reason, is that we're including it into to make sure that we have all of our 4K through 8th grade students having a true up-to-date plan at the exact same time versus trying to piecemeal it across the district.
Again, I'm not seeing dramatic. I mean, we're talking about schools across the street from each other. And we have a crossing guard that covers that location. So what's the cost? What's the additional cost of doing the Winnequa school piece?
So each school costs approximately $13,000.
Susan Fox?
Well, we do have a new street, a new sidewalk on McKenna Road, which is a new thing. So I don't know if that'll have an input, but part of the thinking of putting it on that street and on the side of the street they did was because it's the school side. So there could be some minor impact. But then my other question was, so how long is a plan like this theoretically good for? I mean, we're required to have one, but is it good until there are additional major changes, or how does that part work?
Really, it's good as long as the district wants to say it's good.
Okay.
So obviously as communities develop, so I would agree, like going back to like even Susan Manning, like unless there's major changes in an established community, I mean, I think once we have this established, it's set for a number of years versus a community that's growing and adding roads and adding sidewalks, or moving subdivisions or adding a subdivision in the middle of what used to be a vacant field. But there's no specific criteria that says that these only are for 10 or 15 or even 5 years. It's when the district feels that it needs to be updated based on changes within the community.
Yeah, I think it doesn't hurt to update it, I guess, because the other thing that there's a lot of concern about in Monona is some of the work that's going on, but there'll be work going on in 51, for example, is increased traffic coming through Monona. So, and I don't know if that's happening yet, but it will be happening. Might be good to keep that in mind. I mean, it's just another factor, again, because a lot of the streets don't have sidewalks. And if we have more people cutting through on their way to wherever to avoid the intersection with the Beltline from Monona Drive, I mean, that's already been an issue. So there may be that kind of change in traffic pattern. I don't know, even though there haven't been momentous development.
Well, there were dramatic changes to the traffic patterns in Monona during the Bridge Road thing, which would have dramatically affected students walking. We didn't do anything then.
Well, that was temporary. That was temporary, and this, but it
was about a year.
Right.
And the other thought too is that they work with like the police department, city hall or the village administration. But I think what's important is also looking at the number of vehicles that are going through. And so even though we might not have more, development, but we do know that there are, the city of Monona has done a phenomenal job. And as we've seen it in enrollment, is sort of moving out, bringing in younger families, which might cause more traffic that's flowing around. And so that would be the other reason that I've looked at it, is just making sure that we are keeping, these safety plans up to date, because obviously safety is our #1 priority. So, I mean, I get, originally I was like, well, let's do all of our schools, and that was going to be close to $100,000. And then I'm like, well, with the high school, we have that pretty well established, but I think that still there's Monona Drive and individuals crossing that. But I think keeping a plan consistent across the district from 4K through 8.
Peter, did you have a question?
Yeah, I would note that virtually all of Monona is within 2 miles of Winnequa School. And we have done things like the reconstruction of Monona Drive, and we are doing a lot of development within 2 miles of Winnequa, which is down in the area around Bridge Road, south of that. In fact, there's a bunch of housing units that will be added very shortly that in the new development there. So it's probably timely, but my question is this is what our insurance is asking for? Is this, have you discussed this with them?
So the insurance obviously refers us back to DPI and the Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
And so ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't have to contract with anybody, but that means that individuals on staff who are not experts in analyzing traffic patterns and things become the ones that make that decision and send it to the Dane County Sheriff's. So even though we have a consultant or a professional service professional doing this, this plan still has to go to the Sheriff's Department for final approval. And then it goes and it's reported to DPI. So then as we establish our bus routes, any of those kids that live in this unusual hazards qualify for free busing, and DPI then recognize that as part of our aid program that we can continue to do.
And as always, I would note at this time that the lack of sidewalks in Monona means that we have to bus kids that could otherwise walk, which means the school incurs costs, even though the city saves money on sidewalks.
Okay. So can I have a motion to approve?
I move approval of the agreement for engineering services with Traffic Analysis and Design Incorporated.
I would second that.
We give it to Susan Manning.
Great when you're fighting for a second. It's great. It's done.
Doesn't matter to me.
Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor, Lorraine?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Andrew? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Next is the 2020-2021 summer school dates.
Okay, so you do have a memo that Lisa Height prepared as our summer school coordinator. We are asking for approval of, this is our traditional dates that we have for summer school. And look, obviously we'll find out, we'll learn more in the months to come exactly what that might look like. But as the current order and restrictions are in place, we would be able to hold in-person summer school again for classes up to 10 to 12, depending on the size of the classroom with the physical distancing requirement. Normally our summer school classes are 15 or less, and so we do think that we can accommodate that, and that will be our goal, to have in person. But we also have the added challenge of some construction going on again this summer, which we've handled before. It might mean then utilizing the high school in Glacial Drumlin for some of the elementary sites. But so we'll certainly come back with more details about exactly how this will look, but we do want to get the calendar dates approved so we can move forward with the planning process for summer school.
Peter?
Is there any thought to perhaps the need to expand it this summer in response to, is there any anticipation of additional demand from students who are parents who are looking to make up, or, because of this year has been so disrupted? Is there any thought to that? that maybe we should
Yeah,
increase?
I'll go first and Lisa can expand upon that. But yeah, we've talked about that quite a bit. And clearly our goal is always to be able to try to meet the demand and you know, the requests of parents. And of course, ultimately it depends upon our staffing availability and, you know, what do we have available for staff and space. So, you know, we can conjecture, we think, you know, as far as what we might see, but that will be certainly, you know, we'll see, I guess, what we get for requests. And so I don't know if Lisa, you want to add anything to that?
I would just echo what you said. I think I included a mention of that in the memo itself. Staffing really will dictate what we're able to offer. And sometimes we do hire staff outside of our own district employees. However, after more than a year of teaching in new ways, and I can't predict how many staff we're going to that we're going to have available for summer school. So we normally send a survey out in February asking staff about an interest. We'll continue to monitor interest and hopefully we'll be able to provide the programming that's needed.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion to approve?
I'd move approval of the 2020-2021 summer school dates as presented.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Lorraine?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Andrew? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Next is the 2021-2022 school calendar.
Okay, so you have a proposal. We're asking for approval this evening. And you might recall the rationale for bringing this to you now in February and as opposed to December, which is the normal time that the board approves the calendar for the following year. There's two reasons. One is, of course, with the pandemic year and the planning for reopening and so on, you know, there's a little bit of uncertainty at the, you know, in the fall about what that might look like. But probably the primary reason that we've talked about this is, you know, the idea of examining a possible early release schedule in lieu of full day professional development days. And so as we developed our calendar, the status quo is pretty straightforward about, you know, how we traditionally have had our calendar days. But we did take time this last month and a half to develop a potential early release concept, surveyed staff. There's some information for you on board docs on that. At the end of the day, we didn't feel there was enough evidence that we're ready to move forward for next year with that. But I think it does, you know, enough work done that it might be worthy of some additional examination. But so with that, we are recommending a status quo, essentially, calendar. One really important thing to note, and our personnel committee has already talked about this because it affects some, you know, paid holidays for some of our staff, is that in order to have kind of the traditional holidays off and having December 3rd as a non-school day, the way the calendar works, that we were kind of short one day. And so the recommendation from the committee was that on Good Friday, that would be a school day. And that is in line with the idea that we don't want to specifically develop our school calendars only around Christian holidays, and to be thoughtful of you know, basically all holidays that might be considered. And so that is a change in this proposed calendar.
Okay. Can I have move for approval?
I'd move approval of the 2021-2022 school calendar as presented.
Second.
All right, any further discussion?
I have a question, Dan.
Yes.
Can you just real briefly just go over the process that involves the teachers with the calendar?
Yeah, great question. So, so we did put together a committee where we asked for representation from each school. So we had administrators and teachers from every school. I did list the names of the folks that were involved there. And so they met twice in December. And again, the discussion around the kind of the status quo piece is what I mentioned around just trying to make those traditional holidays work. And then we did put a pause on making a final calendar recommendation until we could get the feedback on the possible early release. And had we come back with a recommendation to include a release, clearly we would need to bring the committee back together then to look at that. Since we are not recommending the early release for next year, then we just move forward with the status quo.
So that's why there were the 2 meetings and you didn't have a need for the 3rd one.
Yes.
Susan Manning.
Dan, how did the teachers, so I guess I have 2 questions. About how many teachers were involved in this process? Just a rough number.
Well, I can tell you exactly. The names are listed in the board docs. So approximately 2 teachers per building.
Two teachers per building?
1 to 2 teachers per building.
Oh, because you had said, quote, unquote, a lot when you gave that to us before. Okay. I just thought maybe there were smaller meetings with more teachers other than that. And then what was the response of the teaching staff in terms of, particularly, I would say changing like Good Friday or anything like Good Friday, just because that's been not so much talking about Christian holidays, but that's a dramatic change from what we've done for the last how many years. So I just wondered how people thought that would affect them.
Yeah, so we did talk about that, and the preference was to have the December 23rd as a non-school day versus the Good Friday day.
And the rationale for not doing both?
There's not enough days in the calendar, so that would have meant going into the next week in June if we tried to take both off.
Any more discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor? Lorraine?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Andrew? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries.
Okay, and Andrew, I would just like to mention that I would, just because this has continued to be an issue and it continues to come up, and I appreciate Dan providing this input to us, but I think we should bring an agenda item for discussion to talk about the process, particularly when we make kind of a major change from what we've done for 30 years. Just so we feel as a board very comfortable with the process when a change, what appears to possibly be a substantial change might occur, so that we have a comfort level. Because I don't have any input from personnel about the process right now either. Did you get any, Susan?
Personnel hasn't been directly involved is not directly involved in the calendar committee. So no. I imagine we may want to talk about it at a future meeting, but I think I would assume that when teachers are representing their building, that there is some communication within the building, whether it's a staff meetings or whatever, if they're talking about a change like that. When they indicated a preference for having December 23rd versus Good Friday, that's coming from I assume it's not just the people on the committee. So I don't know, maybe I can't make that assumption, but generally my experience was always that whoever was on the calendar committee was talking to their colleagues. They're not just making those decisions by themselves, but yes, it does seem to be an ongoing issue, so. we probably will have some discussion about it.
All right. Moving on to teacher and support staff handbook revisions, section 8.5, district directed self-quarantine leave.
Okay, so again, this handbook language was added in August, approved by the board to provide paid leave should any of our employees be required to quarantine due to close contacts in the workplace. And at the time, I don't think we clearly considered about the ability that some of our employees might be able to continue working remotely versus some may not be able to. And so this language just clarifies that the paid leave would be in the case where the teacher or employee is not able to work remotely. So it does represent practice. It just we want to provide clarity in the language.
Can I have move to approve?
I move approval of the teacher and support staff handbook revisions as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Elizabeth?
I just have a quick question, Dan, around how we are articulating to staff what unable to perform your duties remotely means.
Right, so depending on the position, so I'll give an example, if a custodian is required to quarantine, clearly they cannot do their duties remotely. And so that's a pretty easy decision to make. For professional staff or other staff, it's really determined on a case-by-case basis. A teacher may not be able to perform their teachers remotely if they are personally ill or showing symptoms, in which case then as well that they would not be required in that case. So it really depends on the position and the ability that we examine, like I said, case by case. So
okay, thank you.
Okay. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Lorraine?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Andrew? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Next is employment contract for school administrator. Susan? Fox?
I move approval of the administrative contract as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Lorraine?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Andrew? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Moving to discussion items. First up is School Resource Officers SRO Program Update.
Okay, so the last time the board had a discussion was back in the December 9th meeting when we talked about the program evaluation piece. And then prior to that, back in September, when the board took action to authorize an MOU for just 1 year until we could make a long-term recommendation at the end of this year with regarding to the programming. So I just wanted to give an update on both of those items. Now that we do have students returning all the way grade through K-12 by March 15th, I still haven't finalized that MOU. We have been working on it through this time. For whatever reason, the feedback or the reply from trying to work with both the village and the city and their attorneys, there's been a little bit of a delay in getting responses, but I think we're really close to a final agreement. So I did include a draft, and there's a couple of things to note. So some of the most important pieces that are in there, working not only with our attorneys, but our insurance carrier on the liability pieces to clean that up, to make sure that, and that was some significant changes from the previous agreements. And then the other thing you might reference, if you recall, we talked about the roles specifically and how those might be outlined in the MOU. And so what we landed on is actually referring to our board policies rather than putting those roles directly in the MOU. That gives you as a board full determination of exactly what those roles are by adopting your own policies. And so that will be one of the recommendations moving forward if we are to continue the program, is that we examine those policies and we can bring those in alignment with what our expectations are and roles. So those are outlined, or those are referenced in that MOU, and that will be part of the evaluation process to make recommendations on changes if needed to those policies. So why don't I stop there and see if you have any questions about the MOU?
Eric?
So Dan, just so I understand then, if our policy, let's say on substance abuse and drugs in the schools, we could take a closer look at that and focus on treatment rather than, punishment. And then the MOU would adopt that because it's one of our policies, correct?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, so in a sense, it gives the board more autonomy you control the policy. It does have to be negotiated.
Okay. Susan Manning?
Well, and speaking as chair of policy, I would depend very strongly on board input. We can research, pull out what we have right now. The teaching, learning, equity, Eric and Lorraine and Elizabeth's experience and Peter's policy, and this won't just be a policy committee work piece. This will include the board.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, and you still have a group that's looking at the continuation. I mean, this is really just for the rest of this year, correct? So
Right. So that's the other thing that we actually updated. So the term is specifically only for this last quarter.
Right.
And to get through that. So then, so back to the policy, or I guess back to the program evaluation, that will be part of what we'll bring forth as well as a recommendation to the board, specifically policy, recommended policy changes as well for you to consider. But we'll make sure that we do that timely enough that the board can have input as well, as opposed to just bringing something at the very end for you to vote on, that you can discuss and debate and make changes as needed. So these are kind of tied together. So back in the December 9th, I had shared out, kind of the context about how we'd go about this evaluation. And so we are ready now to move forward. So what I've developed thus far is an internal steering committee to finalize exactly all of the assessment pieces and process that we'll have. That includes representation from administrators from each of our school levels, along with myself and Shelby Steele as our equity coordinator. And then one of the things that we'll be doing moving forward is determining, obviously, we want to include a larger stakeholder group to the larger committee. So parents, students, community members. So that will come together in this next month. And then as part of the evaluation, what I'm proposing, that we do as kind of the initial framework is that we really look at it as a two-pronged approach. One would be, if we are to consider to continue the program, what are the policy recommendations that we recommend changing and defining the roles? And then the second part of that would be, if we do not continue the program, how do we fill the void of some of the duties that the SROs were filling, whether it be with our existing staff or new staff. And so I want to be able to have both those things as part of the report so that the board does have flexibility. At the end of the day, of course, we'll make a recommendation, but I also want you to have the flexibility that either way that you decide that, okay, we have it laid out about how we're going to move forward. So at this point, then you can expect a monthly update between now and the rest of the school year as we progress moving forward. In talking to the folks, the city and village administrators, as far as a timing on their end, Their budget year, thankfully, is on calendar year, starting January 1. So for their end, they just need a commitment from us really by the end of the summer. My goal is to have something to the board by June so that you can take July and August in consideration if you need to before making a final decision moving on to the next school year.
Maureen?
I just want to make a comment. Dan, I really appreciate your approach in allowing stakeholders to examine the policies with this. I'm really I'm impressed with the changes. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Elizabeth?
I agree with Lorraine. I was thinking the exact same thing. I also appreciate the monthly update. As you know, Dan, I come to the world with a lot of questions in general, but specifically around this topic. So I think the monthly update will really, really help. So thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you, Dan. Moving on to the 2021-2022 Certified Staffing Plan.
Okay, so tonight is not for approval. We'll come back next month. But I just wanted to share where we're at this point, in particular, the expected change in staffing due to bringing Granite Ridge online next year. And so this is shows you the comparison of our current year FTE. Now this is for certified staff only, which are basically employees who have a contract, teachers and specialists and so on. And so by those grade levels, those are things that you've already seen when you looked at the open enrollment recommendation in January about the projected class sizes and how many sections that we have. That varies every year from grade to grade as certain groups roll through. So again, those are projections at this point. This will get updated next month as our high school students continue their course selections. I'll be meeting with Mr. McGrath next week to talk about that process for determining high school FTE. But at least the reason that we ask you to approve this every March is so that there aren't surprises. You approve every individual contract as we hire teachers. But if we're adding positions, we don't want to bring that contract and ask for approval and you wonder, well, why are we hiring this additional piece? So it's really more of a communication piece. And then the one thing that always changes every year slightly are some of those part-time positions, as we look at the exact FTE. So we'll keep this updated for you, but this is just kind of a preliminary look at what that looks like. And if you look at the bottom line, you'll see at this point, we're looking at an increase of about 6.5 positions based upon two factors. One is just the elementary class sizes, projections, and then the second thing is the opening of Granite Ridge.
Elizabeth?
I just have questions around student services, Dan. And so I see that there's opening at Granite Ridge for counselor, psych, and social worker. What percentage FTEs are those for Granite Ridge?
Yeah, we do have a document on that. Maybe Krista, maybe you know right off the top of your head, she put together the plan. So we do have, as you know, a combination at every building. Mm-hmm. It's not identical, and so there actually are full-time positions. And so those specific FTE are not specifically at Granite Ridge. Right. There's some shifting around, but I should turn it over to Krista if you want to speak to that in more detail.
Sure. Dan just sort of answered it. I don't have the document in front of me either, but what Dan said, so it really was a district-wide view of like what's needed everywhere. So some of those exact FTEs are not to Granite Ridge. The new FTE, I think it's fair to mention, the new FTE really, the additional piece is a social worker role at the elementary school, in the Cottage Grove schools. That's what we have not had before. So that will be the new piece. The FTEs across the board are adjustment at every school and every level. So it's just with all the shifting around where we chose to make those increases. But the primary new position, and it's actually designated to be a split position, but of course, that role of social worker in the Cottage Grove elementary schools is the one we're excited to bring into the mix and be able to have that role represented in a place where we haven't had that yet. And after that, there's just a lot of kind of shuffling around and taking that into consideration. What roles and representation, and then the unique needs of each of the new schools and their new configurations too.
Great. Thank you, Krista. And then second question around student services, and that's the kind of flat line around school nursing services, and kind of given, I think, the elevation and amplification of school nurses this year, do we feel like we have enough school nurses? Are we seeing a need for an increase? I mean, obviously we're not, because we're not FTEing it, but I'm curious about that staying flat. I mean, finding them is one thing, but just thinking about it theoretically, if we need more.
You want to take it, Krista?
Yeah, I
Poor Krista. She's like,
Yeah,
oh,
no,
this is
I'm
not a
willing to
I actually know the answer to this one, but
and
I'll let
hopefully it
Krista
aligns
say.
with, Dan's. The piece we don't on, this is certified staff as well. I think the conversation we have and continue to have is, what is the role of our two nurses? Our nurses are very engaged in the day-to-day, like they don't necessarily have like district level role. I mean, they do. They don't have solely roles sort of as district nurse. So I think the conversation we continue to have is around the health assistant role and how that could free up the capacity of our existing nurses to continue to do the great work that they've done this year. I mean, yes, we absolutely have relied on them heavily and continue to do so. So that's the piece that's not represented here, is what would the full health team,
health services kind of suite look like.
Yeah. And just to clarify, we did, for the health assistants, we increased by 1.5 FTE for current year during, with return, and we will keep those on for next year.
Perfect. Great. Thanks.
Peter?
With the same number of teachers, we're increasing the TOSA though. We're going from 3 to 4 in the elementary schools, even though we are not adding teachers. What do you anticipate that we will be able to do different with that increased capacity?
Right. Well, the additional TOSA is, again, because of the additional school. Right. Okay. And then likewise, along with that, library media specialist, for the new school. So I guess I'm not sure I understand your question. I mean, the role will be the same as the current role.
The role will be the same, but now we have more TOSA. I mean, it seems to me that, I know exactly what a library specialist, media specialist does and how they're linked to the facility. TOSA, however, supports the teaching staff.
Yeah.
We're not adding, and I'm not criticizing this. I'm saying that we're not increasing the teaching staff. So it seems to me that you have more capacity in the TOSA positions now that you didn't have last year.
Got it. So yeah, you're exactly right. So for example, at Cottage Grove this year, the TOSA supports 3 grade levels. Next year, the TOSA will support 2 grade levels,
right?
And as well as all the other support positions. So, Lisa, I see that would you like to talk a little bit about the role and
Sure. I mean, the TOSAs really have taken on that role of instructional coach, and they are just working so tightly with the co-planning teams, also helping the principal in many ways at the elementary. In most cases in Cottage Grove, the principal doesn't have an assistant principal. The schools aren't large enough maybe to warrant that. The TOSA is like a right-hand person in a lot of ways for the principal as well. So they become a very powerful team. But their work with teachers and helping guide professional development, helping do coaching cycles with individual teachers, doing some team like grade level coaching, etc. All of that has just become so necessary and important work that's happening in our district. The TOSAs their roles have shifted away from, being all about educator effectiveness, because now we're really more familiar with educator effectiveness, although they do still help with the SLOs and the PPGs. They help review that and work with teachers who are in supporting years on that. And then also they still have some pieces of some behavioral support. So they help on PBIS teams, but they also do some of the really in the immediate behavioral event, they really provide some immediate support. So all of those things are still very important, but more than anything, I'd say the instructional coaching role of the TOSAs has gained traction and grown dramatically. And it just is very, very important, not only for individual teachers, but for teacher teams and for building-wide professional development.
Yeah, I understand that. And the coaching role, I mean, the research says that the number one things that schools can do to improve practice is to have instructional coaches. And I'm just pointing out that giving the staffing plan that you've now increased the ratio of TOSAs to teachers to available to coach by a significant margin. And I'm just wondering if that triggers any thought about what's changing, what could expand, what the TOSAs could do better, since they, a TOSA will be distributed across fewer teachers.
Susan
Right.
Fox?
I mean, I think you said it, Peter. In general, their reach will be able to be, more deeply felt across all teachers because the ratio is becoming more manageable.
Susan Fox?
Well, that's kind of what I was going to say. I think their job has grown, and I think they've had the ratios have been probably challenging before. And I think it's also very difficult to have a position like that and have them shared between two schools. I just think they get very valuable. No, so I'm just saying I think it's very valuable. So it makes total sense to me why we would want to add one. And I think the answer, I think you have kind of answered that question, Lisa, in terms of the job has grown. So that's kind of what you're asking, Peter. Are there ways they could work differently? I'm sure they will find ways, because if they have fewer teachers, they maybe can work more.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm wondering if there's been a thought about how we utilize this resource to good. And it does beg the question: what's the right number? What is the appropriate way to approach this? Particularly if we have this instructional coaching model, is one per school the right number, or is what's the capacity and what is the need and what's the best match? I mean, we're changing it substantially. So it does beg the question, what is the best match? Maybe were we short before? Do we need to add more of these positions? I think that academically, they're very easy to justify in my mind. These instructional coaches positions, if you look at the research, they're very easy to justify. So it does beg the question, what's the right number? And is one per school the right number? We're going to see a change. We're going to see a change in the resources and capacity of these pretty substantially with this change. And so I'm just, like I said, I want to make sure that we as school district make changes deliberately and with a forethought about, what's the right thing to do, what should we be doing, and I just was asking if this has triggered any thought on those lines.
Eric?
Well, I kind of agree. I agree with you, Peter. I think it's an important question to ask. I also wonder, are the TOSA's position, from what I understand, seems to lean a little bit, not a little bit more, much more administrative than teacher. And I know that probably is a need, but my main concern would be, is that taken away from a position that would have direct student contact and be able to help our students out? Or is that need proven and shown to be there, that we need that for, like you say, instructional coaching? I think that's an important, something that needs to be considered. And I don't know the answer.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I agree with Eric. I think my challenge always with TOSA as a role is that it's so large and non-specific that it tends to take on, as you state, Lisa, like all of these different kinds of roles and functions. And so wondering that I would have, I think that's a good question that you bring up, Peter, around okay, so we've got this new building. We're going to have a person who's identified as being sort of an elevated instructional person in some way, quasi-administrator, instructional coach, kind of whatever that is going to look like. But how do we really define that in a way that is very clear in terms of what those job roles and expectations are, and what the purpose of those positions are, what outcomes we should expect? And that's always been my challenge with the TOSA position in general, is that it just feels so big as to not be able to be defined. And so, I mean, I echo what Eric says, especially around what is the need? What is the level of student contact? If it's instructional support, great, then like, let's call it that. If it's quasi-administrative, then great, let's call it that. But this idea of kind of having this large looming role always seems, and it's like a constant like sort of scope creep and role creep always seems problematic to me.
Elizabeth, I think I can speak a little bit to that. I
Yeah.
mean, we do have a updated job description, so you definitely can see that. But the key aspects of that TOSA role, again, they're in all of the co-planning team meetings with teams, and so they're working directly with teachers as the teachers are planning, providing instructional support. It's also, as you can imagine, to be a person who is embedded in all the different teams' conversations. They're able to really carry this very important thread through a building about, how you're meeting students' needs. They also are involved, and I really think saying quasi-administrator is too far of an extension. I wouldn't quite go there, but they definitely are part of discussions in terms of like, what is the direction of the building that the principal is setting, and how do I help make sure that, when I am communicating with teachers in co-planning teams, that, we're working together in the same direction, that we're all rowing the boat in the same, in the same path. And again, just the level of expertise that they hone through their work. They work with the other TOSAs. They meet and have really productive and important conversations about their practice, because coaching is hard. It's really hard to be an effective coach, and so you'll see many of our TOSAs have done this coaching work for years. And it's not readily turned over. Like, they stay with it. They're very good. And so they're embedded with the teachers. They're sometimes doing modeling. They're bringing good questions to the table. They're really helping our teachers be better co-planners as well. So, I mean, I guess, to Peter's point, like, do we have enough? Well, I might argue at some point, like, it would be great to maybe have some content specific coaches instead of a generic instructional coach, like, where's the math coach, per se, more specifically geared towards that. But in general, the expertise that these folks bring as instructional coaches, and then the other pieces that they also support. And when I mentioned the SLO and PPG, that's the student learning objective and the professional practice goal that a teacher writes every year. That's directly aligned to, again, that coaching work. So it really does tie together. And honestly, it's probably more focused than you may guess from some of the conversation, but they're a very important part of every school building.
Right. And everything you say there depends on the number of teachers and number of students. So I'm surprised that the right number is always one per building. That just doesn't seem right to me, if that makes sense. And sort of my question would be, if all of our students were in the same building, how many TOSAs would be the right number? And that's probably what we should staff for.
Here's what I would suggest. It's 10:20 at night. And this is kind of what starts to happen to us at 10:20. I think it would be wonderful. And I think part of this is Peter has a lot of experience with how the TOSAs evolved, but I think in the newer board piece, our thought process in putting these into place, putting these into the buildings, having a conversation with people that have been TOSAs, like Emily Foster, like Mrs. Vetter, again, these people that have transitioned. I think we should take 30 minutes in a board meeting in March, or if we're going to schedule an additional March meeting, to talk about the TOSA program and allow the TOSAs and maybe some teachers and maybe administration to provide us input on how this program has gone. Because I don't think we've gotten any updates in the last few years about this program. And we were all very, very supportive of it when we put it in place. And I understand the budgeting and the staffing here. So I think we should talk about have Dan come in and bring the people in and spend 30 minutes talking about the basic program rather than arguing about whether or not we should staff a new building with a person. That'll come out of that conversation, but I think that might help us move forward.
Well, I don't think that anyone's arguing about whether or not we ought to have one, right? I mean, I think that obviously it's an important position. The question that I have, I think, and I think this echoes what Eric and Peter are saying, is like, how are we at this opportunity we have, right, in opening a new building, looking at how we're utilizing our staff towards our outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the question that's on the table. And so I think, you know, a conversation around that makes sense to have that discussion. But I don't think anyone's arguing about whether or not we ought to have it or need to have it, as much as what are its purposes and functions, and how are we making sure that we're reflecting that in how we're.
Oh, I'm really sorry. I totally misunderstood. And maybe Peter wants to clarify that. It was my impression that he was clearly asking Dan why he would be putting a TOSA into the new building. So again, I think if we're knowledgeable about the position and we look at the numbers of each of the students in the building, we're going to be better informed in being able to have this discussion.
Peter?
I didn't ask that Dan that at all. I just, you know, we're talking about staffing levels right now. We're having a discussion about staffing, and I just and it brings up this issue of what's the right level of staffing for TOSAs, and that's why I wanted to discuss it. And I mean, it's clear we're going to have more. We're going to have 25% more TOSAs in the elementary schools, and what's the right way to look at that, and what's the right way to move forward on that? It's just because I understand the program and I support the program, but I do question whether one per building is the right number, or whether the number should be based on other criteria. And I suspect it should be based on other criteria. And I'm certain that there's plenty of expanded things for them to do. And I just, like I said, with additional capacity, I'd just like to hear what we think we might be able to do with it.
Any more discussion? All right. Hearing none, I'll go ahead and move to the next item. Next discussion item is the Monona Grove High School solar PV installation.
And actually, we had that entire discussion during Peter's Sustainability Committee report, so we can move on past that.
All righty. Let's go next to the school renovations construction update.
Okay, so the latest executive summary from Friendorf is attached. So the biggest update, well, two things. First of all, a reminder, we got upcoming meeting dates. Next week, we're excited to have our next board tour of the new school of Granite Ridge. And one of the things that we're really excited about is that one of the wings is going to look very nearly complete. Carpeting's going down currently, and doors, and so pretty exciting to be able to share, you know, that most recent progress. You've already heard a little bit about the other pieces that are going on as far as the projects in the other schools. We've talked about the high school. The stadium project, of course, is on schedule to move forward this summer. The other renovations to the high school, we've been able to move up due to the the availability, I should say, of the building. And so I guess that would be an opportunity if you have any questions about that timeline or that part of the schedule as far as the high school renovations.
All right. Any questions or concerns? All right. Thank you, Dan. Last on the agenda is the future meeting dates. And let's see here. So our next school board meeting is March 10th. We got the teaching and learning equity next week, the 16th. And we talked about the board tour on the 17th. And we have the policy committee, the 23rd, and personnel, the 24th.
And Dan talked about adding another meeting. He's going to put that out to work on the superintendent eval, right?
Yes.
Well, and I would say if you need to open that up to other topics so that we can finish, when we start at 6, we can finish by 10. I would totally support that.
Susan Fox.
I was just gonna mention that I will not be able to attend the TLE meeting next Tuesday because I'm working at the election, which also a reminder,
that's
everybody
right.
to vote for the state
Yeah.
superintendent primary.
Oh, that's yes.
It's the only thing on the ballot, but I'm signed up as a chief inspector, so I'll be working that shift, but
All right.
And the building tour is on the 17th. What time is that?
that's earlier. It's like 4. Let's see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
4.
4
p.m.
o'clock.
Yeah, 4 o'clock.
Thank you.
They wanted to do it where they're still light, I think. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Woo, that was quick, Elizabeth.
It's 10:27.
All right. All in favor, Peter,
Aye.
Susan Manning,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Lorraine,
Aye.
Eric, Susan Fox.